Playing TBC Classic for the first time has been absolutely awesome, and we have done so much so far. We've leveled the druid all the way up to level 70, got full pre-base gear, took her into our first raid, and ended the phase at rank 3. We've even started leveling up our second character. But with Blizzard actually announcing the release of phase 2, I have decided to smash together all 4 of the druid videos we have done so far to create one long movie style video, because you guys seem to like it when I do that. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. As someone who lives in the Scottish countryside, something I've always struggled with is lag, and that's why I choose to use GearUP, who are currently partnered with Discord and are offering us a free 30 days of Discord Nitro. All you have to do is download GearUP and log in with your Discord account. No subscription needed. Since GearUP is an official Discord partner, the service is 100% compliant and secure. You never have to worry about account bans or safety issues. But be quick, since quantities are limited and are on a first come first serve basis. GearUP is an amazing tool that allows you to boost your connection across many different games, including World of Warcraft. It is incredibly easy to use. Just one click and my game is now boosted, giving me an incredibly stable, latency-free connection. And recently there has been a lot of European players reporting of a US rerouting issue, where the traffic is routed through the US before returning to EU servers, which obviously results in much higher ping and reduced connection stability. GearUP can help address this by optimizing the routing path, making it an easy way to improve connection performance. But not only that, GearUP is fantastic for cross-region play, allowing European players like myself to play very comfortably on US servers and any other servers that I like. But remember, this offer is only lasting until June 2nd, so make sure to grab yourself GearUP and let me know how low your ping can go. Just over 1 year ago, I created my first ever WoW Classic character, the legendary warrior Fartinsniff. And since then, we have done so much. We've explored every zone, ran every dungeon, and killed every single raid boss. And Vanilla WoW was the single greatest gaming experience that I've ever had. Like genuinely, I've never felt this passionate about a video game before. But things are changing, because TBC is now here. New zones, new dungeons, new raids, and I cannot wait to see it for the first time ever. The time was around 11 PM and the Burning Crusade was very near to being released. And of course, I was stood outside of the Dark Portal patiently waiting. The servers, on the other hand, really were not having a good time. Shortly before I hit record, it was chaos. Alliance were wiping the Horde, then Horde were wiping the Alliance, etc. But as it got closer and closer to the release, no one could do anything. No abilities could be used, no mounts could be mounted, but that's when it happened. The expansion was officially released, and wow, such riveting gameplay. Yes, of course, the Blizzard servers had a complete meltdown and kicked everyone off literally all of the EU servers. And all I could really do is wait. So for the next half an hour, I sat and I stared at, well, nothing. And very randomly, I was actually able to log on. But to my surprise, no one was here. So either I had managed to get in before everyone else, or everyone else was already gone. But excitedly, I ran up to the Dark Portal, and for my very first time stepped on through. I was so excited, I couldn't wait to see Outland's beautiful skies for the very first time. And then I got disconnected again. So once again I sat for another 30 minutes trying to get in, restarting the game over and over again, hoping to see at the very least a queue to get in. But eventually, that horrid loading screen disappeared and we were standing in Hellfire Peninsula. I was so happy. Finally, I was going to be able to play, or so I thought. I stood trying to mount up for a good 5 minutes, but I made my way down to accept the very first TBC quest, only to discover that the NPC wasn't there. And at this point it was already 12:30 AM and I just thought that this really wasn't worth it. So I made the very wise decision to log off and get at least a couple hours of sleep and then see what the servers are like then. So logging back on at around 2 AM, not only was I able to get into the game, but the NPC was actually here and I was able to pick up the quest and grab the flight point. The game then instantly threw us onto a bird and sent us flying over to Durnholde. And honestly, this first look at the zone around me, I couldn't believe it. This place was absolutely beautiful, and it felt a little strange because I became so used to the weekly grind of get world buffs, do raids, then log out and do it all again next week. I was so happy to get more world to explore, more quests to do, more dungeons to spam. Once we had arrived in Durnholde, I handed in the little quest we had been given and had a little look around the place, which included setting my Hearthstone here. And now that the introduction stuff is done, we are now able to do what MMOs do best, which is whatever the hell we want. And I decided to head over for a dungeon run, since we are able to do that right off the bat. And man, just taking those first few steps out into the world, I was so happy. I couldn't wait to see what the expansion had to offer. And for our first stop, it is none other than the dungeon Blood Furnace. Now, as far as dungeons go, I personally love doing them. I think that they're one of the best parts of an MMO, and having a whole new set of them to do, I just couldn't wait. And well, Blood Furnace was absolutely awesome. To my understanding, the Fel Orcs are part of Illidan's army, and the Blood Furnace is where they extract Fel blood from Magtheridon in order to use it to fuel more Fel Orcs. I mean, come on, that's awesome. Now, in terms of the loot, well, what I was told by a lot of people is that I would just replace all of my vanilla gear within 5 minutes of TBC. Well, that's actually not true at all. In fact, we wouldn't be replacing any gear, at least for a good while. That being said though, I still really enjoyed seeing all of the new items. Every single green BOE was something new, and it really made it feel like this was a whole new experience. And right off the bat, the dungeons were already more difficult than vanilla, mainly because of these technician guys who worked almost exactly like the technicians from Blackwing Lair, where they throw AoE bombs on top of players, and they also set mines that take half of your HP at once if you stand on them. Was it difficult? No, it wasn't. But it's really nice to have at least something to look out for because, again, it just makes the place feel alive. So we cleared our way through until we were standing in front of the very first boss of the dungeon, Rogak. But before we could fight the boss himself, we had to flick this little lever and a couple waves of mobs came out to attack us. They really weren't anything special. In fact, I think these guys were even squishier than the other mobs. But after defeating all 4 waves of the mobs, we can then attack the boss himself. And he's this giant floating tentacle eye. I mean, who comes up with this stuff? But yeah, I didn't really manage to get a proper look at him because he fell over really quickly. So moving down towards the final boss now, our tank actually died to these big Fel guard guys, and I think it's because they like to charge the casters and reset threat, or something along those lines anyway. But thanks to my fantastic bear tanking skills, we were able to clean them up and res the tank. And very luckily, whilst we were sitting and replenishing mana before the final boss, a Dawnstone dropped out of a chest. What it's for, I had absolutely no idea, but judging by the reaction of the other players, it's something that I can sell. Which was kinda true. I mean, I'm not going to say no to 50 gold, right? But moving on to the final boss now is Celedan the Breaker. But again, we had to cleave down a couple of adds that he came with. And he does actually have a mechanic. It's a big AoE fire nova, but we ended up killing him so quickly that we never even saw it. For the loot, he dropped the Ryments of Divine Authority, a pretty nice caster cloak. And another thing that I absolutely love is that there's actually a path straight back to the entrance of the dungeon. Gone are the days of having to run back through the entire instance trying to avoid all of the mobs that we skipped. And just like that, we had managed to clear our first ever TBC dungeon. And what a fantastic way to start the grind. So with one dungeon run now completed, the group I was with had a fantastic healer, Mr. Zero Impact. This guy was not only a fantastic healer, but a really nice dude, and I'm still friends with him even now. And well, he asked if I wanted to go in for another run, and obviously I said sure. But first, I really had to sort out my bag situation, because it was just full of complete garbage, leftover consumables and pummelers from vanilla. So in order to help out with the bag sorting, I decided to update my enchanting skill, because as expected, all the enchanting materials were ridiculous ridiculously expensive. So not only does it allow us to save space, but we would be making a good bit of gold on the side. But with our bags all lovely and clean, it was time for us to head back in for our second Blood Furnace run. Except this time, we are tanking. And well, I kinda had a mini heart attack because everything kinda froze in place and I thought the servers had crashed again, until whatever that was happened. But surprisingly, it went pretty well. Bear tanking has become so much more consistent with the addition of Mango. Like a single crit on the mob generates enough threat to last a whole fight. I was even able to pull the mobs pretty well, making sure to avoid all of the techie mines. Well, for the most part anyway. And yes, I'm now realizing as I'm writing this that Brogak in fact wasn't the first boss and that this guy actually is. Mechanics wise, he's not really much of anything. He kinda just flings you in the air a bit. He is pretty cool looking though, reminded me a lot of something inside of Naxxramas. So whilst we were just clearing through the dungeon now, I think it's probably best if I explain the plan currently. Now, originally, my plan wasn't to do the dungeon spamming thing. However, for the most part, we are going to be sticking to dungeons. And the reason why is almost entirely because of rep. In TBC, we obviously get access to heroic dungeons, and in order to do heroic dungeons, we need to be at least revered with the corresponding faction. And the way others made it sound is that you could only get rep from the dungeons. And this is my main character. This is the one that I like to min-max and do all the end game raids and stuff with, and I really didn't want her to fall behind. Now looking back, I do realize that that wasn't true and I could have just farmed the rep later. Besides, I still really enjoy doing dungeons, and doing this would let me experience every single one of them, meaning we would have at least some idea of what to expect from the heroic versions later down the line. And this version of TBC is extremely alt friendly, because once you unlock the heroic once, you don't have to do it again on any other characters. So my plan is to do everything properly on the hunter when we get into it. But for now, it's all about getting the rep done. So we clear up Brogak and Calidan and then reset the dungeon and do it again. This time it really wasn't anything too different. I of course switched back to Cat Spec because, let's face it, I'm really not that good at tanking. We also had our first wipe in a dungeon, which had to come sooner or later, right? But amongst all the chaos, something very exciting happened. We hit level 61. And to be honest, after seeing my character stuck at 60 for so long, it felt kinda off to see 61. As for the first talent point, I decided to put it into Natural Shapeshifter. It's a very simple talent that makes all shapeshifting mana costs reduced by 10, and then eventually going up to 30 once we have 3 points in it. Although simple, it is a very, very important talent, because as Cat Spec, we obviously use a lot of mana through power shifting, and this just lets us add more shifts before going It also brings us one step closer to getting Omen of Clarity, which is an entirely different thing that we will talk about later. And well, that was it. We were now set to spam until we couldn't anymore. I knew the route, and I knew that I could tank if we needed. So fast forward several hours, we were of course still running Blood Furnace, but we were getting somewhat close to Honoured level with Honour Hold, which is all we had to do before moving on to something else. And well, at this point, it was now morning, and we all know that feeling when you've just pulled an all-nighter. So we quickly finished up the run, and I actually didn't go back into Blood Furnace. I decided to head on into Hellfire Ramparts, because apparently there's a quest at the end, and of course, I wanted to do it. So I found myself a group of players to run the dungeon with, and we got stuck straight into it. Almost immediately though, something was off. I recognized this place. I had definitely seen this place before. I would even say that I was familiar with it. Clearly at some point during my retail grinding, I had spammed this dungeon for one reason or another. Now of course, running it on Classic was completely different to anything I remember doing on retail, but it was nice to see something that I was familiar with, but in a much slower pace. It allowed me to actually look at what I was killing, and yeah, these guys were cool. They looked exactly as you would expect an orc to look. Heavily armoured, axe-swinging freaks. On to the first boss now is Watchkeeper Garglemar. I really like this guy's design. He's got no hands and instead has a sword and axe for hands. Doesn't seem all too practical if you ask me. Mechanics wise, I honestly don't think he did anything, and we were able to kill him pretty cleanly. Moving upstairs now and on to the second boss, it is Omor the Unscarred. And he's a big scary demon guy, and someone in the chat said to kill the ads. To be honest, I actually only saw one of them pop up, but I did what I was told and I meleeed him down. After he was down, we could actually then move straight into the final boss of the dungeon, Vazrudin. And Vazrudin himself actually fell over pretty quickly, and I was able to get the letter quest we were after. But that's when his dragon comes down and we've now got to kill him as well. And he was somewhat tough. His mechanic was what every classic player fears: fire you've got to not stand in. But with the dungeon now done and the letter quest in hand, I headed back over into Durnholde to turn it in, and it gave a massive 20k XP. And we were so incredibly close to being honoured with Durnholde, so I decided to head back into Blood Furnace for one last run. And it was perfectly standard. I completed a random quest that I found, got blown up by the landmines, and managed to take down Brogak no problem. And well, we were so incredibly close by the end of it, but unfortunately had to go back in for another. And well, after that run, we were officially finished with the first rep grind. And honestly, I was just completely dead. I could barely see straight, I was so tired. So I made the responsible decision to go to bed for at least 5 hours so that I could wake up ready to grind. So waking up later the same day, it was now about 5 PM. Yes, doing this completely destroyed my sleep schedule. But now that we are done with Hellfire Citadel, for now at least, our next stop on the list is the Slave Pens to grind out reputation for the Cenarian expedition. And as I was riding over, I was actually able to get a proper look at the zone, and it's just so beautiful. I also found this humongous thing, which I've heard many horror stories about. Kinda like the Devil Sores on crack. But taking those first few steps into Zangarmarsh, man, I was in love. This might have became my favourite zone in the game. The first thing I did though was set my Hearthstone here to allow for easy bag clears and repairs. But of course, we had work to do, so I wasted no time and immediately started moving towards the dungeon entrance. But along the way, I made sure to have a good look around, because I honestly loved the aesthetic, which is kinda weird because I've never really been huge on swampiness. But this zone had an elegance to it. It was slightly eerie, but cozy at the same time. Along the way though, I actually found a second settlement area, and admittedly it took me way longer to figure out how to get up to it than it should have. And since this Slave Pens is literally around the corner from here, I decided to make this my home instead. But with all that now out of the way, it was time to get to it. And apparently the entrance was located in the center of this giant lake. However, I really struggled to get to it. These stupid fish kept attacking me. So using this blood elf as fish bait, I was luckily able to sneak past them and watched as he was mauled to death by the fish. Actually getting to the dungeon though, I thought was pretty damn cool. Because you enter into this giant tentacle pipe thingy, and you swim down and it opens up into this big cave. And it really did feel like you were in a hidden cave under a giant lake. Getting to the dungeon now though, it really didn't take too long to find a group, and we got straight to it. Obviously, as the name suggests, this dungeon's theme is that the Naga have taken Draenei prisoners and are using them as slaves. That does offer a pretty interesting mechanic though, because if you kill the big Naga slave master, the Draenei become friendly towards you. However, the Draenei still offered reps if you killed them, so we made sure to kill them first. As a whole though, I thought this dungeon was pretty cool. It was definitely quite a dramatic shift from Hellfire Citadel, going from massive armoured orcs to living fish people. The first boss from this dungeon is Menu the Betrayer. This guy is quite cool, being a Draenei that betrayed his people and is now enslaving them. Mechanics wise, he is a shaman and he likes to drop corrupted totems around him. Other than that though, he was pretty straightforward and we could clean him up nice and easily. The second boss was probably my favourite, called Rockmar. He is literally just a giant mutant crab thing. As for the mechanics, I don't really think there was anything notable. He was probably doing something to the tank, but as a DPS it was as simple as stand and stab. Moving on to the final room now, we cleared off the crabs and set this guy free, and that's when something tragic happened. Our healer disconnected right before the final boss, and apparently a massive chunk of EU players got kicked offline due to the servers being on fire. So the tank switched over to being the healer and I became the tank. And I really wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing, but they said tank him against the wall, so that's exactly what I did, and it seemed to work out okay. And just like that, we had managed to clear our very first slave pens. So with our first slave pens run now completed, I actually didn't go straight back in. As a group, we decided to head over and give the Underbog a go. And well, I was expecting just more Naga stuff, but this one is actually a lot more themed around tentacle squid monsters, or whatever the hell that thing is. And well, pretty much immediately after we started our run, we managed to hit level 62. As for our talent point though, I just did the exact same as level 61 and shoved it into natural shapeshifter, which does make a huge difference by the way. You get at least 2 extra power shifts overall, which not only gives me more damage on bosses, but lets me go longer than 1 pack of mobs before needing to drink. The first boss of the dungeon though is Hungerfen. He's basically just a massive version of the squid monsters. Mechanics wise, I didn't personally notice anything to be honest. I'm also now realizing that I forgot to mention exactly the same as the Hellfire Citadel dungeons. Unfortunately, there is literally 0 pieces of gear for us throughout either of these dungeons, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because I can list myself as full base and get into groups almost immediately, and it's bad because I do want to be chasing new gear, there's just nothing new to get. For the most part though, this dungeon was more themed towards the nature side of things. That was until we got towards the end of the dungeon where we go back to killing Naga and weirdly more Draenei. So I assume these Draenei are either betrayers or potentially slaves that have joined the Naga. That did eventually lead us onto the second boss of the dungeon, Gaz-An, who according to Wowhead is a Hydra god or something like that anyway. Not very godlike if you ask me though, considering we killed him in about 15 seconds. But now that he's dead, we jump down off of the platform and begin making our way down the hallway towards the final boss. I also found this night elf for a random quest that someone shared. Moving down to the final boss now, he is a funky dude called the Black Stalker. I mean, what the hell is this lanky ass thing? Quite unfortunately though, our tank ended up getting slammed by Mr. Lanky here, so I quickly shifted into bear form and taunted the boss to attack me, and doing so allowed us to clean up the fight quite easily. And that was it. We had officially completed our first ever run of the Underbog. Not gonna lie though, I wasn't the biggest fan of this one. I'm not too keen on spaghetti monsters, but at the end of the day, I'm still glad that I went in to see it. So now that we had at least experienced the dungeon, it was time to spam until we were at least honoured with the Cenarian expedition. We did slave pens again, then back over to the Underbog again, just to keep things nice and mixed, you know? And we then finished things off with 2 more runs of slave pens, which I decided to tank, which went about as well as you could expect with me as a tank. And at this point, it was nighttime again, and I was completely dead from grinding all day. And to be fair, we had made some really good progress. We were level 62, almost 63, and had 1.5 reputation grinds finished. But for now, I really just needed a proper night's sleep. Logging on to play day 2 of TBC, I felt refreshed and ready to grind. But if I'm honest, I just straight up didn't record the first few hours, because all I was really doing was trying to get honoured with Cenarian Expedition, and I don't really need hundreds of gigabytes worth of slave pens footage. During that time though, I did manage to get us to level 63, and I used the talent point on the final level of Natural Shapeshifter. And although I didn't record everything, I did decide to record the final run of course, which went a little bit wrong right at the very end. We ended up pulling both packs of the crabs, which proved to be just a little too many mobs, but we quickly respawned and we managed to clean everything up, no bother. And that was it. We are now completely finished with the Cenarian Expedition grind. And well, that left us in a pretty weird position, because we were sat at like 1/5 of the way through level 63, and we weren't due to go to the Ouchenai dungeons until level 64. And sure, I could probably just spam more slave pens until then, but I think we have done enough dungeons, at least for now anyway. So in terms of questing options, I was quite tempted to go back through into Hellfire Peninsula so that I could do everything in order, I guess. But travelling back and forth from the slave pens, I really liked Zangarmarsh, and I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to explore it a bit. So first off, I went back into Telvador and grabbed all of the available quests there. And lucky for us, the first few we were going to tackle were literally right below Telrador, and it was the task of slaying 10 Marshfang Rippers, which are like little versions of the Underbats. And man, being able to get a proper look at everything, this zone was just awesome. It felt like a simple swamp aesthetic with little rickety paths leading everywhere, but at the same time it had this perfect balance of weirdness. The giant mushroom forests were great, and seeing all of the weird alien creatures roaming around was just cool. And the quests as a whole were pretty simplistic, which is a good thing. I was able to just chill out for a bit and not worry about rep farming or anything along those lines. Eventually I had managed to make my way all the way up to the very northeast area to a place called the Deadmire. And the reason I came up here already was simply because I saw on the map that there was a quest here, which was the simple task of taking the thingy back to an NPC in Telrador. So I quickly finished up the Marshfang Ripper quest and made my way over to the first settlement that we visited, which is the Cenarian Refuge. And here we were able to grab another big chunk of quests to do. And it got to the point where we literally had like 15 quests for this zone with loads more quest markers on the map. So to start it off, I began moving to the south this time, where I ran around the outskirts of this big lake slaying some hydras, until I came across our second quest objective, the task of slaying Naga. I mean, who doesn't love a good bit of Naga murder every now and then, right? Now, one thing that has massively improved the questing experience since vanilla is the addition of Mangle, because in vanilla we only had access to Claw, which really just isn't a good ability, right? And now that I'm thinking about it, this is the first time we've quested on this character since leveling, which was way back in like phase 2 of vanilla. But looking back on that now, the difference between Mangle and Claw is huge. But anyway, I quickly finished up the Hydra quest and collected all of the Naga claws, and that's when I hit a bit of a wall, because we actually had an elite quest to do here. And since at the time of recording it was like 7 AM, there really wasn't many people around to ask for help. But regardless, I decided to give it a go anyway. And well, it started out great, until whatever the hell that was that hit me, and that was a bit crushing because I really wanted to get as many quests done as I could. But I thought back to my training, and I remembered how I soloed the Blackrock Depths boss Lord Rockor. So I switched to my bear spec and equipped whatever stamina pieces I had lying around in my bags. I also popped regrowth and rejuvenation to basically keep me at full health for as long as possible. And it looked pretty even for most of the fight, until I got a nice couple of crits and managed to take the mini boss down solo, which felt fantastic. But with the Naga now dead, I moved back over to the southeast. This time we had to kill a bunch of Umbrafen, and these are some freaky ass looking dudes. Not quite as bad as the Harpies, but they're definitely up there. I'm not actually sure how to describe them, to be honest. They do, however, have an incredibly cozy looking village, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are these guys not like Draenei before they become Draenei? Whilst I was over here though, I also found another Mr. Lanky, and yes, this was yet another elite quest mini boss. So using the exact same tactic as before, I switched over into bear spec, popped a regrowth plus rejuvenation, and began mauling Mr. Lanky to death. And right before he was dead, another feral druid invited me to join his group, clearly just so he could get quest completion. So you're welcome, Clawbacca. But after taking him down, my quest log now looked like this. I mean, is there any better feeling in WoW than this? And by the way, this was only after like an hour and a half of questing. In vanilla, this amount of quests would easily be 2+ hours. And I think this is a great change, because let's be honest, vanilla questing is just needlessly long. But after handing all of those in, we are of course presented with even more stuff to do. So I headed south and into this cave where we had to kill 10 marsh dredgers. And I'm not 100% sure on the lore in this cave or anything, but there seems to be a bit of a feud between these giant moss freaks and the little blue spore guys. And despite me saying that most of the quests in TBC are shorter and whatever, this one was actually quite needlessly long. Though I don't think it was because of the quest design this time, I think it was just because there were a couple people contesting the area. We also had to go back over to the Naga area, not to kill any, but this time we had to disable lake controls. Again, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I assume the Naga are attempting to siphon something from the lake. But once that was done, I once again headed back over to the Cenarian Refuge and handed all of the quests in. And for the first time in a while, I returned to Telrador to do the exact same thing, which admittedly I probably should have done much sooner since we could have been working on everything at once. So to start off the second round of quests, what better way to do it than with something incredibly frustrating? What we had to do this time was collect 8 eel fillets, and if you've watched the channel before, then you'll know just how much I hate underwater quests. The only time I ever really enjoyed an underwater quest was on the Shaman, because obviously we had access to underwater breathing, so we were free to just roam around the ocean freely and take our time. And yes, I realised about an hour later that we were given an item that allows us to breathe underwater. Afterwards, we once again had to kill a big elite Naga mob, and yes, I did the exact same thing that I did on the first 2 elite mobs, switched to bear spec, etc, etc. However, this one was a hell of a lot harder. She was spawning ads to come and attack me and overall just hitting a lot harder. However, this time we actually had a friend to help us, but that's when the horde decided to start attacking. They killed me, but very luckily our friend was able to finish the job. We then actually had to go all the way back up to the Deadmire, this time for a couple of kill quests. We had to kill withered bog lords, parched hydras, and withered giants. Now this place kinda intrigued me a bit. Like, why is the entire zone so beautiful and full of life except this one area? So I decided to look it up, and turns out this area used to be a lake, but the Naga siphoned out all of its resources and it's now nothing but an empty wasteland filled with corrupted mobs. Which makes sense why there's all those big Naga machines around Zangarmarsh's main lake. I like that we can piece together bits of lore here. The quests themselves were actually pretty quick though, so I smashed my way through them and then made a return to Telrador, where I turned in a couple of quests and emptied my bags. Just the usual stuff. So now I actually decided to move over to the west of the zone for the first time. I grabbed this quest from Watcher Lisa and got stuck straight into the questing. And man, this area was so awesome looking. I loved how vibrant everything was. I even took a minute just to look at it. I mean, this place just felt so alive. The quests themselves though were actually quite simple. We were just killing bog lords for their tendrils. However, this small little area was so contested, with mostly horde too. I really only saw about one other alliance player here, but of course I stuck it out anyway and I was able to get the quest done after about 20-ish minutes. We then had to go north a bit, not to kill anything this time, but to collect discarded nutriment off the ground. And I think this was a follow-up quest to the last one, but to be honest I really don't know anymore. I kinda lost track of everything. But I then handed it in to Watcher Lisa, which then sent us way up north, this time to kill ogres. Seems a little bit out of place, but I wasn't going to argue. This quest took forever to complete. This one literally took me 30 minutes to get done. And it's not like there was a lack of mobs or it was really contested or anything, they just really didn't want to drop the quest items. But regardless, I did eventually manage to complete it, alongside finishing up a little spore collecting quest that I had been doing passively on the side. And so for the final time, I returned to Cenarian Refuge and handed my quests in, which got us to level 64. And the crazy thing is, we had been questing for like 3.5 hours now, and there was still tens of quest markers on the map. And I'll be honest, I think at least as a solo, that questing was way quicker for leveling than dungeon spamming. But now that we are level 64, it was time to get back to work on the rep farming. So I packed up my things and began moving over to Terracar Forest. Finally, something green, kinda. As much as I loved Zangarmarsh, I'll always be a sucker for the green zones. Almost immediately after entering Terracar Forest, the first thing I saw was of course the capital city for the Burning Crusade, Shattrath City, affectionately known as Shat. But I can't lie, it was kinda empty. I definitely don't think I was ahead of everyone else. I mean, comparing myself to the pace that my guild was leveling at, I was miles behind. But I guess everyone is just out and about leveling their characters. I didn't want to spend too much time in Shattrath, but I wanted to at least familiarise myself with the main things. So I set my Hearthstone at the Scryer's Inn, I also visited the cooking trainer for some reason, and had a little browse of the reputation rewards. But overall, I think Shat is a fantastic place. To be honest, it's really nice to have a home that isn't Stormwind. I mean, I like Stormwind and all, but it's just nice for a little change. But with the little city exploration over, it's time to get to work. So I hopped onto my mount and began moving down towards the mana tombs. But to my surprise, the nice greenage had ended and the zone became a massive grey desert with a huge coliseum inside. And something about this place felt awesome. Probably because we are just a tiny little speck surrounded by these massive walls with no way out. Well, to be honest, there probably is a way out, I just couldn't find it. And well, this was going to be our home for a little while, because down in here, there are the 4 Ouchenai dungeons, and first up is the Mana Tombs. And I can't lie, as we're progressing through the levels here, it is getting harder and harder to find groups as a feral druid. Nobody likes cats apparently. But of course, I tried and was eventually able to find myself a group to run it with. So first off, this place very obviously has a completely different vibe than any other dungeon so far. I mean, going from massive orcs to more of a nature themed into whatever the hell this place is was pretty dramatic. So we clear our way through the first few packs of mobs until we get to the first boss, Pandemonius, who is this giant void guy. And he was very easily the toughest boss yet. Like every single dungeon I do, I was going in completely blind. Turns out he shifts into this void state where he has a spell reflect for all damage, including melee damage. Plus he shits out some void bolts every now and then. And the group was so incredibly close to getting him down, but unfortunately wiped with the boss on less than 1% HP. But we rezzed up and went straight back at him again. Going in this time and actually knowing what was going on, we of course were able to take him down properly. But even still, this guy was chunking away at our health, and at times we were pretty close to dying. Now in terms of the loot, well, again, unfortunately there isn't anything good enough for us. Not too long after killing the first boss, we were standing right in front of the second boss, Tabarok, and he's a giant rock elemental dude, and he was significantly easier to kill than the first. As far as I could tell, all he does is sometimes stuns the party and does some AoE damage. Other than that though, he's just pretty tanky. But apart from the first boss, this dungeon felt very easy as a whole. I kinda just shut my brain off and pressed shred until we were eventually standing in front of the last boss of the instance, Nexus Prince Shafar. In terms of mechanics, well, I was told just to kill the ads when they spawn, so that's exactly what I did, and that was it. He did drop this cool looking bow though, and this group was actually staying to spam for most of the day, so of course I decided to stay with them, and so the spamming began. But I'll be honest, I really wasn't a massive fan of this dungeon. Apart from the first boss, all of the mobs were a breeze and pretty uninteractive, and the aesthetic just isn't really for me. It's just a bit spacey for my liking. But regardless, we still had to get the rep done. And I was here for practically the entire rest of the day. And I didn't record every single run because, again, I really don't need hundreds of gigabytes worth of Mana Tombs footage. But during the spam fest, we did manage to hit level 65. And for the talent point, this time I started shoving them into the talent intensity, which when maxed out would allow 30% of our mana to continue to regenerate whilst casting. Plus it makes Enrage instantly generate 10 rage, which is a nice add-on, I suppose. And well, after like 15 runs of Mana Tombs, we had done it. We were now honoured with the Consortium. So we quickly finished up the run, and at this point it was the end of day number 2 of TBC launch. And we had done so much so far, with even more to do later on. We'd managed to get level 65, we were honoured with Durnholde, the Cenarian Expedition, and now the Consortium. Plus, we were even able to squeeze in a nice big questing session. But there is still so much left to do and see. But I had been grinding for non-stop the entire day. So for now, sleep. Last time we played, it was the launch of TBC Classic, and we managed to get so much stuff done. We managed to hit level 65, plus we had gotten to honoured level reputation with the Cenarian Expedition, Durnholde, and now the Consortium. But there is still so much stuff left to do. So the goal for today's video is to reach level 70, the maximum level in TBC Classic. Starting things off, it is currently the 3rd day of TBC launch, and we are currently stood in Shattrath City. I wasn't actually doing anything, I was mostly just exploring the city a bit more. I then actually decided to go all the way back to Stormwind, because I had forgotten about something very, very important. My class trainer. Throughout the entire of levels 60 to 65, it never even crossed my mind that we might have new abilities to get. And thank God I remembered, because we had so much important stuff to get. We got a new shred rank, ferocious bite, dash, thorns, pretty much every useful ability we have, as well as a really cool new ability called Maim. It's a finishing move that causes a decently large amount of damage, plus it incapacitates them. So I am very much looking forward to seeing how it works out in PvP. But with all that now out of the way, it is time for us to get started on the first rep grind of the day, and the first stop is Ouchenai Crypts. Okay, so like I said in the last video, originally I wasn't going into TBC and planning on spamming dungeons to level, but let me give you my thought process as to why I decided to. Obviously, because rep is very important in TBC so that we can unlock the heroic dungeons. And this time around, TBC is very alt friendly, because we only have to unlock heroics once, and when we do, we are automatically given access to them on all other characters on that account. And looking at things from a broader perspective, we're going to be leveling multiple characters anyway, so I'm really not fearing missing out, because I know that I'm going to be exploring every inch of Outland regardless, so it only made sense for me to get them all out of the way now. And besides, I really like doing dungeons, and doing them now would at least give me a decent idea of what to expect when we eventually get around to doing the heroic versions later. So Ouchenai Crypts. Going into this one, I actually wasn't expecting to enjoy it too much, because given my experience in the Mana Tombs, the overall spacey void theme just isn't really my kind of thing. However, this one was actually quite cool. It was much less on the spaciness and had more of a death theme around it. Plus, the bridge leading up to the first boss felt sick. It was an eerie path surrounded by a red void. The boss himself, though, is called Shattrath the Dead Watcher, and this is probably one of my favourite models in the game so far. He's a floating tentacle eye thing, which is a great mix of creepy and cool. For his mechanics, this one is a terrible one for casters because he reduces casting speed by a huge amount. Plus, he also makes people explode. As for the loot, he dropped a pretty nice looking plate helmet. But we were claiming our way through the next part, which were these massive packs of skeletons. And very stupidly, I managed to get myself one-shotted because the mage frost nova'd a bunch of them together, and since I was the only one standing next to them, they all started attacking me. And that kinda caused a chain reaction because we then wiped. My bad. But of course, we rezzed up and managed to continue from where we left off. And this time, I actually used my brain a little because I switched over to using Hurricane. And big surprise, the AoE pack went a lot smoother. Moving on to the final boss now is Exarch Maladar. This guy just has an aura about him. The male Draenei already have a Chad look about them, so size them up 3 times and this is what you get. As for his mechanics, well, throughout the entire fight he was using Moonfire on people, and right before he died, he summoned a second boss to attack us, which I think is a pretty cool mechanic. Though I think it could have been cooler if that second boss also dropped a piece of loot. And of course, the rest of the group asked if I wanted to go again, but I had other plans, because I had just learned about a questline that would not only give us insane XP, but also our first piece of TBC gear. So I took myself over to Telvedor and began running through the zone towards Nagrand. And I still can't believe how beautiful this zone is. This is easily my favourite zone in the game so far. That was until I took my first few steps into Nagrand, because holy crap, I thought Nagrand was nice, but this place takes it to a whole new level. As I've said in many of my other videos, the green and natural zones are my favourite, and it really doesn't get much more green and natural than this. And of course, the quest we are here for for is none other than the Ring of Blood. And very surprisingly, it only took about 5 minutes to find a group for, but it is a small string of elite quests that take place in this small rustic looking arena. Basically, the game spawns in a big elite mini boss, and as a group we've got to take them down. We then turn the quest in and then start the next one, and in total I believe it was 6 quests to do, and each turn in was like 20k XP. So 120k XP for 10 minutes of work? Yes please. But not only that, because the last quest chain offers a variety of very powerful weapons for each class, one of which is the Staff of Beasts. This is one of those weird druid weapons that offers stupidly large amounts of attack power for cats and bears, or a kitty stick as I've heard some people call it. 31 strength, 30 agility, 45 stamina, and 375 attack power. I mean, come on, I had to get that. Eventually, we did manage to get to the final mini boss called Mogor, and this guy was absolutely slapping the tank. But we get him down regardless, and that's when he reses himself and once again starts attacking us. And he absolutely clattered the tank, and unsurprisingly, that did cause us to wipe. But of course, we resed up and gave it another go. And I'm still not sure what the problem was the first time, because on the second attempt, we surprisingly had no issues at all. So very excitedly, I went back over to the quest giver and claimed my shiny new weapon. Unfortunately though, the healer for whatever reason didn't get any quest completion. They reloaded and everything, but still nothing. So for a third time, we went back at Mogor, and again, no issues at all. And just like that, we had acquired our first ever piece of TBC loot. So with our first gear upgrade in hand, the plan currently was to speedrun level 66, because I wanted to get started on the dungeon attunement for Black Morass, which is a very, very important dungeon, and we'll talk about why later. And I decided that the best way for me to do that would be to run mana tombs. I have no idea why I did. There's zero reason for me to be running this dungeon again. There's no loot to get, plus I just don't really enjoy this dungeon that much. So I ended up doing a total of 3 full mana tombs runs. Nothing notable happened really, some nice and clean runs with the same group. And towards the end of the third one, we managed to hit level 66. As for the talent point, I put a second point into the talent intensity, a very simple talent that allows 30% of our mana to continue to regenerate whilst casting. Plus it gives 10 rage when we use the enrage ability. So with us now hitting level 66, it was time to start the attunement process. And surprisingly, we were actually heading over to Tanaris and into the Caverns of Time. And this was a place that I was actually familiar with, because this is where we get the Ankaraj rep ring and the Cthulhu eyeball cloak. So it was nice to see this place opened up. And flying down here for the first time was really cool. It was like we had gone to a different planet. The skybox was beautiful of course, and there was these like massive planetary rings circling us. Getting down into the cave now, we first had to do what was like a little escort quest. We followed around this woman and she told us she is a custodian of time who deals with ordinary disturbances like rogue mages altering time to elevate their status or wealth. But since Nosdormu isn't here, we have to go in to defeat the infinite dragonfly and ensure Thrall's freedom. I mean, that's pretty awesome. Now, I'm not some kind of lore guru. In fact, I've never really been massively invested in the lore, but this time, I just couldn't wait to see what this was all about. Unfortunately though, at the time of recording this, it was quite late at night since I went snowboarding with my friends that day, but I still wanted to play, and I tried my absolute best to find a group for the dungeon, but unfortunately, we were going to have to leave this one for another day. So instead, I decided that it was time to get to work on the next reputation grind inside of the dungeon Sethic Halls. This here was actually going to be the most important rep grind out of all of them, because later down the line we will need to farm Lower City to Exalted Reputation in order to get the Shapeshifter's Signet, an incredibly powerful ring that could potentially last us until phase 3. Now, Sethic Halls. Regular viewers of the channel will know that I have a thing against the harpies, so imagine my shock and horror when I saw these things. I mean, I didn't think bird people could get much worse than this, but nah. Whatever these things are, far, they take the top of the list for the worst mobs in the game. And to make it just that little bit worse, the aesthetic was bird people themed. There was big nests and stuff everywhere. But looking past that for now, even though it's giving me nightmares, there is also our first piece of dungeon loot in here, which is the Ravenclaw band. 20 agility, 13 hit and 30 attack power. Now it's not pre-bis, but it's actually not that far off. It's like 4th best. So before we leave this place, 100% we will be getting that ring. And of course, it comes from the last boss in the instance, Talon King Ikis. Now this monstrosity is actually somewhat tough. He was chunking away at our tank's health quite a bit, but he also had an LOS mechanic, which I imagine would one-shot you if you stood in it. But we get him down and big surprise, the ring didn't drop. But we have officially completed our first ever run of Sethic Halls, and unlucky for me, this dungeon was actually the optimal dungeon for lower city rep, at least at this level anyway. So fast forward a couple of torturous bird people hours, we are of course still inside Sethic Halls, and very randomly, I for whatever reason decided to start recording again, and good thing I did, because we get Ikis down again, and what do I see? One disgusting Ravenclaw band, and of course, I needed on it, and we won. Now unfortunately, this is where I realized that we actually needed to be level 68 to equip it. But regardless, I decided it was best to end the day on a high note. So I hearthed my way back to Shattrath and logged out. Day number 4 is here, and we still have a crap ton of stuff to be getting on with. And for the first couple of hours, of course, I spent it inside of Sethic Halls. As much as I hated this place, we just had to get the rep done one way or another. But you know, looking past the bird people, I actually didn't mind this dungeon. It was much nicer to spam than mana tombs in my opinion, apart from the final room, which was always kinda ass due to fears and mobs charging and threat resetting. But fast forward an hour, of course I do eventually start to get quite bored, and that's when I remembered about the Durnholde dungeon. And again, I really struggled to find a group. There was a maximum of 1 group in the group finder looking for a tank, but that's when Mr. Holy Schlong came to my rescue. He's a member of the guild and also quite a chill guy. So thank you Mr. Schlong for your help. Getting to the dungeon now, I really didn't know what to expect. And well, this was possibly the strangest dungeon I've ever done, because we are literally just in Hillsbrad. But I did actually think this was quite a cool concept. All of this times traveling stuff opens up a world of opportunity for dungeons, even if the story had 0 significance. And ooh, I'm a human. Yeah, for whatever reason, everyone is transformed into a human, regardless of your race/class combination, which I suppose makes sense, because why would an elf be in the South Shore? So first off, we had to go down to these cabin things and clear out all of the mobs inside and then set them ablaze. And doing that clearly gets the attention of the first boss, Lieutenant Drake. And I thought he was pretty cool, because he is literally just a warrior, with hamstring, AoE fear, mortal strike, etc. His loot was just this pair of plate boots. And on the topic of loot, I think it's worth noting that again, there is 0 loot for us in here. Though that can't be said about the heroic version, because the heroic version offers us our phase 1 best in slot bracers. But that's a topic for another video. So we clear through the keep a little bit and head down to the basement where we find Thrall himself. Now, me being the idiot that I am, I unfortunately didn't accept his quest. I was scared of it starting an escort quest or something and then everyone else missing out. So I was waiting for the group leader to start it for us. But the hunter ended up doing it, which meant that I missed out and we would now need to come back to do this a second time. So we start escorting Thrall, taking down a couple of packs of mobs as we went until we get to the front gate and are confronted with the second boss, Captain Scarlock. And again, I thought this guy was pretty cool, because he is literally just a paladin. As a whole, that's one of the things I really liked about this dungeon, because it's simplistic fantasy stuff. Killing warriors and paladins, going into a keep to rescue an orc. As for Scarlock's loot, he dropped a pretty good looking plate chest piece. Thrall then mounts up and we start traversing through Hillsbrad until we get to this barn where we take cover to hide from these Tarren Mill lookouts. But of course, they find us and we obliterate them. We then move to the Tarren Mill church and kill a couple more guards. And that's when things started to get a little weird, because Epoch Hunter comes down and starts ranting about how Thrall must die. So as a whole, this dungeon was so friggin' cool. This was so different to any dungeon I had ever done. And this kind of time traveling thing, I think this is a fantastic way to allow players to visualize old lore, even if there is a bunch of weird dragon things trying to kill you. As for the dragon's mechanics, I actually didn't see anything apart from the hunter's pet taunting the boss constantly. For the loot, he dropped the Mantle of Durnholde. Durnholde? What the fuck? My god, I wish I read this thing at the time, because these shoulders are actually pre-base for feral tanks. But my stupid ass clicked greed. So I know that I said that we would need to do the dungeon again, but Mr. Schlong said that he actually needed to come back tomorrow anyway, and that I'm welcome to join him, so that's fine. I can just wait until then. That would at least give us the rest of the day to finish off the lower city rep grind inside of Sethic Halls, except now I have decided to tank them, because it's getting really difficult to find groups as a cat, and I think it's mainly because of the first boss, Darkweaver Sith, because she spawns in a load of elemental ads, and if they're not CC'd or AoE down, things can go pretty badly. And as a cat, we don't have CC or AoE. To be honest, I don't know if that's true. I'm kind of just coping at this point because I know cat spec just sucks. But as a whole, this dungeon wasn't actually that bad to tank, despite how horrific the theme is. The pulling is pretty easy and you get some nice big packs. And well, that was it. Now that I know how to tank this dungeon, we were set for a good few hours of grinding. And along the spree, we managed to hit level 68. Only 2 levels left. As for the talent point, I decided to shove it into the last level of intensity. And coincidentally, this was also the last run we needed in order to get honoured with the lower city. So although some parts of this dungeon were okay, I really hope that I never lay eyes on these freaks ever again. So now that the lower city rep grind is done, I decided to tackle an errand, as I like to call it, that I'd been putting off for a while, and that is leveling up the first aid skill. Lucky for me though, I have been hoarding all of the enchanting mats and cloth since we started, so apart from having to buy the recipes, it was nice and cheap to level. But apart from that, I didn't really have much else to do, because I was waiting for Mr. Schlong to clear Durnholde with me. So I decided to head over and tackle another very important errand, and of course that's getting started on the Karazhan attunement, which is actually way over in Deadwind Pass. I mean, I was always curious about this place because I had passed through it, flown over it, but never went inside. At least now I know. Now the storyline here kind of goes back into the whole time traveling stuff, where it's suspected that a second version of Karazhan could exist, yet it's sharing the same space as the Karazhan in the present, or something like that anyway. So for the first quest that we had to do, we had to head down underneath Karazhan where loads of these spirits and undead mobs are roaming around. And according to the quest, the reason for the undead's existence is unknown, and that's why we have to collect their essence and bring them back to Archmage Alterus. But as I was just completing the quest, minding my own business, a shaman asked if I could help him kill this warrior. Didn't know why, but I said sure. And this dude must have been a prot warrior because the amount of health this guy had was insane. But we killed him regardless. And that kinda came back to bite me in the ass, because after the shaman had left, that same warrior had found a friend and decided to kill me. To be honest, can't even blame him. For the second quest we had to venture down into Karazhan's cellar. And to be honest, this took me ages to find the entrance. I even had to Google it. But I really like the vibe down here. All of the cobwebs and dusty old bottles really sets the vibe. What we actually had to do was take a reading of the well. However, I tried to clear the area a bit, and one mob turned into 2 mobs, which turned into 4 mobs, and I tried using my bear form, but even then I ended up dying. But I respawned respawned and stealthed my way back out again and handed the quests in, which then sent us all the way over to Hillsbrad and over to Dalaran to an NPC called Cedric, who talks about Medivh's disappearance and the only person left who can open Karazhan is Khadgar. So I hearthed back to Shattrath and spoke to him, and he said that he split Karazhan's key into 3 fragments and placed them inside dungeons. And whilst all of this was very exciting, it was now like 1 AM, so instead of destroying my sleep schedule again, I decided that we would continue this storyline tomorrow. Day number 5 is here, and it's a little bit of a shorter one. Don't know why, I don't remember exactly what I was doing that day. But just as Mr. Schlong had promised, we were starting the day by going back over to the Durnholde dungeon. But this time, I'm actually going to complete the quest. The start of the run went a bit badly though. We were unsuccessful at spell cleaving all of the mobs at the cabins. We even wiped a second time. But looking back on it now, I don't really know why I wasn't using Hurricane here. That would have been infinitely better than clawing at them. But we rezzed up again and finished them off at a much slower pace this time. But we get down to Thrall, and this time I really didn't care if anyone missed out. I was not going to miss the quest again. So we clear out the few packs of mobs until we get to the second boss, Captain Scarlock. Nothing interesting happened, but since I know some of you guys like to look at the loot, and I do too to be fair, he dropped this one-handed healing mace. And again, we clear out the next few packs of mobs until we get to the last boss fight, Epoch Hunter. And again, the loot was those really nice feral tanking shoulders, but my stupid ass still didn't realise that these were pre-bits. But regardless, we did manage to get what we needed done. And no, I didn't realise that the elf can actually teleport you out of the instance. And that was it. We are now attuned for the dungeon, the Black Morass. I also managed to get this quest done, which awarded us with an epic hat. So of course, I wasted 0 time and jumped straight into our first Black Morass run. And this time, we're in the Swamp of Sorrows as Medivh is trying to open the Dark Portal, which again, I think is so cool that we get to visualize parts of the past. Now going into this dungeon, the way others were making it sound is that this was a big, scary, hard to clear dungeon. And yeah, okay, the mobs were hitting quite hard, but the dungeon design, I can't lie, really wasn't it. The way this dungeon worked was that it took place in one small area around Medivh, and 18 portals were going to open and infinite dragons were going to try and stop Medivh. Now I get the idea behind it. The infinite dragonflight want to stop the opening of the dark portal to prevent death and destruction. But apparently, if I've gotten this right, Medivh opening the dark portal actually saves Azeroth later down the line from bigger and badder things. And that's why we have to make sure the dark portal gets opened. Unfortunately, that has left us with a very uninteractive dungeon, running back and forth, going from portal to portal, slaying identical mobs. And to top that off, the XP from here was really bad. It was like half of an XP bar per run. However, inside of this very dungeon, there is actually our most important piece of pre-based dungeon loot, and that is the Hourglass of the Unraveler. This trinket is so unbelievably powerful. 32 crit is already pretty solid, but it also increases our attack power by 300 every 50 seconds. Our phase 1 best trinkets is of course the Bloodlust Brooch plus the Dragonspine trophy. However, we are definitely never getting DST, which means our phase 1 best in slot is Brooch plus the Hourglass. So despite the fact that this dungeon is incredibly boring, I made myself a little plan. There was 2 conditions that would stop me from spamming this dungeon. The first, obviously, if we get the trinket, and second, if we reach level 69. And given the fact that the XP gains from here are so bad, we would get at least like 20 runs before that actually happened, which surely is enough time, right? So we clear up the first 12 portals without any issues until the 12th portal opens and the second boss appears, who is called Temporus, or Temporus, whatever. And he is the boss that can drop the trinket. And hey, maybe we get lucky. 1 run and done. right? No, don't be silly. He only dropped the Epoch Mender. And another thing that kinda sucks about this dungeon is that the game gives you like 5 minutes to clear each boss before spawning the next portal. And obviously, we only need like 1 minute to kill him. And the result of that is that we have to sit doing literally nothing. But we clear up the next 5 portals until the 18th portal opens and the last boss Aeonis spawns. Now this guy I thought looked insanely cool. I think it's probably just because he is so terrifyingly huge. Now in the normal versions of the dungeons, this guy is easily the scariest boss so far. He hits incredibly hard. Plus he likes to stun the entire party sometimes. But regardless, we were able to take him down, and he dropped 2 pieces of loot, the Cowl of the Cutlass and the Bloodfire Greatstaff. Now this group were actually going back in for another run, so of course I decided to join them. This run really wasn't anything different from the first, I kinda just shut my brain off. But we get to Temperus and take him down, and big surprise, no trinket, which is fine because I was expecting this to take a while anyway, since according to Wowhead, the drop chance is only about 11%. So we get to Aeonis and also take him down no issues, and unfortunately after this run, this group then disbanded. But that wasn't going to stop me, of course. And at this point, getting into a group as a cat was really starting to get quite difficult. So I was toying with the idea that I could maybe tank this dungeon at level 68. I mean, how bad could it be, right? So run number 3, of course, no trinket to be seen. But run number 4, I actually decided to tank it, because although tanking this at level 68 was a pretty bold decision, pretty much all of the fights were single target, which is where Bear excels, right? But just like every other run, no trinket. Tanking Aeonis also went surprisingly well, despite a couple of close calls, and well, that was it. For the rest of our spamming spree, I decided to tank, just to speed things up a bit. But run number 5, of course, no trinket in sight. Although apparently this offhand is pretty good. And unfortunately, this is where day number 5 ends. Because like I said earlier, I did sadly have things to do that day. Starting off day number 6, it really shouldn't be a surprise, but yes, I went straight back into the Black Morass. And this is where I plan to stay for most of day 6. And that's exactly what I did. I mean, I did so many runs, I actually lost count of how many runs I did. But I think it was on run number 6 of the day when it finally happened. It dropped. The feeling that gave me was undescribable. It was very similar to that time that I got SGC on my very first character. I stood staring at my screen, waiting to see the roll results. But like everything else in this game, I unfortunately lost the roll. So after spending 5 hours running the same instance and then losing the roll, obviously I was feeling pretty annoyed. So I decided to take a little break and visit my class trainer. And that's when I spotted something very strange. Flight form. I thought we couldn't get flying until level 70, but after googling it, apparently druids get it at level 68. And of course, I wanted to try it out, and I thought that we would also need to train flying mounts, so I ran all the way down to Shadowmoon Valley and visited the flying trainer, only to discover that I didn't even need it. So for the first time, I entered my flying form and started flying around, or at least attempting to fly around. I mean, this was so underwhelming. You see all of these Giga Chads zipping about on their epic flying mounts, and I mean, I didn't expect that, but I never expected this. I think the best way to describe it is, have you ever tried to run in a dream? That's exactly what it feels like. But with that excitement now done, it was time to get back to work. And the first run back in Black Morass, another hourglass dropped. I mean, twice in a row. This one was destined for me. Surely. Yeah. I was very emotionless. And at this point, we had run the dungeon so many times that we were now revered with the Caverns of Time, which meant I could now purchase our first ever heroic key. And to be honest, it kind of felt like it was an item that I wasn't supposed to have yet. But we were now getting so close to level 69, and the number of runs we had left was getting smaller. So I hopped back into the dungeon for our final few runs. The first, of course, it didn't even drop. The second, needless to say. But on the third run, we managed to hit level 69. Which means if I'm sticking to my rule, this was the final run. Our final chance at getting that trinket. Well, I guess that was that. I unfortunately was unable to get us that trinket, and I was sticking to that rule. We were now level 69, so time to move on and get something else done. So So being unsuccessful with the trinkets, of course, the next thing on my mind was the Karazhan attunement. So I decided to get that first key fragment from inside the dungeon, Shadow Labyrinth. So going into this one, I really didn't have that many expectations. I think I've made it pretty clear at this point that I'm not a massive fan of the Ouchenai dungeons. But you know what? This one was not bad at all. It still had the same aesthetic as the other Ouchenai dungeons, but this one was more focused on cultists and demons and stuff, which personally, I much prefer. As for the loot inside here, we had sadly gone back to there being 0 pieces of loot for us. On to the first boss now. He is a massive, scary demon called Ambassador Helmaw. His mechanic was a massive pain in the ass, because it was a 6-second AoE fear. We definitely should have brought a shaman instead of a cat. As for his loot, he dropped these cloth gloves. Moving into the second big room of the dungeon here, I really liked this part. It really brought the whole cultist vibe up, with all the rows of cultists doing whatever it is they do. So moving on to the second boss of the dungeon is Blackheart the Inciter. Now this was probably the most frustrating dungeon boss I have ever seen. All of his mechanics just suck. A little bit into the fight, he mind controls every single player and makes us attack each other, which also resets threat after it fades. He also flings people away sometimes, and then resets threat again. Oh, and then he mind controls everyone again. But eventually, we get him down, and his loot was another pair of caster gloves, this time for resto druids. So we clear through the next couple of rooms until we get to the third boss, Grandmaster Vorpil. He was kinda cool, I suppose. Definitely some kind of warlock anyway, and his mechanic involved these void walkers that kept closing in on the boss. And I assume if they reach Vorpil, something bad would happen. As for his loot, a very nice looking gun dropped. Not too long after killing Vorpil, we were standing in front of the last boss of the dungeon, Murmur. Now this guy was really cool. It shouldn't be much of a secret at this point, but I think massive enemies are cool. And well, that's exactly what this guy is. His mechanics were also pretty dangerous. He cast this sonic boom ability, which you were supposed to run away from. I didn't realize that until it was too late though. And that was it. We had defeated Murmur and completed our first ever run of the Shadow Labyrinth. But before we left, we still had to get the first key fragment for the Attunement quest. We basically just had to click on this phylactery thing at the back of the room, which spawned a very weak elemental. Kill him, and done. First key fragment acquired. So of course I returned to Khadgar and Shattrath and handed the quest in, and he now wanted us to go and get 2 more key fragments from other dungeons. So I wasted 0 time and headed straight towards our next one, which is located inside of the dungeon, the Steam Vaults. Now ordinarily, this would just be something you did with your group as you're clearing the dungeon. However, I decided that it would be a fantastic idea to do it solo. So using stealth, I weaved my way around the hordes of Naga, until we get to the very back of the first room, where we dive down and could spawn the add-in. And using the same strategy for the elites in Zangarmarsh, bear form, rejuvenation, etc. But me being the idiot that I am, I drowned to death. So I rezzed up, dragged the mob to the surface, and big surprise, when you don't drown yourself, it becomes much easier. And I was actually able to take it down this time. Now, if it were up to me, I would probably just go straight over to the Architraves to get the final key fragment. However, it's apparently recommended to wait until level 70 before doing those dungeons. So that kind of freed up a bit of space, and since we are now getting pretty close to level 70, I decided that we would get to work on our second heroic attunement, which I decided was going to be the Cenarian Expedition. And to go from honoured to revered with them, we would need to hit up the Steam Vaults. So I guess I could have just asked the group to do the key quest with me. Now going into this one, I honestly wasn't expecting too much from it. I was just expecting more Naga stuff, but it was actually quite fun. Huge packs of mobs and things seemed to actually be hitting. And in this group, turns out someone actually did need to do the key fragment quest, so doing it solo was just a complete waste of time. The first boss is Hydromancer Thespia. She was pretty interesting to fight. She comes out with 2 big water elementals that we had to focus down first. Then she casts Hurricane and Cone of Cold. Now, it's not difficult, but again, it's nice to have at least something thing to look out for. For her loot, she dropped this caster ring. We then clear our way through the next packs of mobs, nothing massively out of the ordinary, until we get to the second boss, Mechgineer Steamrigger. He is a massive towering piece of machinery. Seems a little out of place, if you ask me. Again, he was quite a fun fight though. He spawns in loads of little ads that are constantly attacking us. As for his loot, he dropped his neck piece, which I imagine is probably quite good for prop paladins. Now, in order to actually get to the final boss of the instance, we apparently had to press a button or whatever to unlock the door. To be honest, I still don't know how that works. So we were clearing up the trash leading to the final boss, and already these packs are quite large, but unfortunately we ended up pulling both packs and wiped right at the end of the dungeon. But no worries, we rezzed up, cleaned the mobs up, and started the final boss, Warlord Calathresh. He wasn't massively special, he's just another Naga, but my threat on this boss was stupidly high for some reason. So for a good portion of the fight, I ended up tanking him. For his mechanics, these Naga distillers I think cause him to enrage. So ordinarily, we would be focusing them, but we ended up killing him so quickly that there was just no point. And that was it. We had cleared our first run of the Steam Vaults. And of course, for the entire rest of day 6, I lived inside of here. As a whole, I think Steam Vaults is okay. It's not my favourite, but I don't hate it. Now, I actually didn't record the rest of day 6 because my hard drive at this point was so full of footage from the past week that I really needed to start saving space. But by the end of it, we were about 1/4 of the way to Revered with the Cenarian expedition. Day number 7 is here, and this was it. This was the day that I planned to hit level 70 for the first time in TBC Classic. And yes, of course, the first couple of hours were finishing off the Cenarian expedition rep grind. And no, I didn't record most of it because I don't really need hundreds of gigabytes worth of Steam Vault footage. It was really only like 4 runs though, and you know, not that much of anything happened. But in the end, I was able to get us to Revered, and I wasted 0 time and rushed over to the Cenarian refuge and grabbed us the reservoir key. And just like that, we are now attuned for the Zangarmarsh heroic dungeons. Now at this point, we were getting really close to level 70, and I wanted to do it in some way that felt special, but the best way I could come up with was running the Shadow Labyrinth. To be honest, I don't know why. I think I was probably just trying to get started on the Ouchenai Heroics attunement. But even then, still didn't give us enough XP to hit 70. But that's when I got a message from the person that we started the entire grind with, Mr. Zero Impact. And he asked if I wanted to come and tank Black Morass. And of course, how could I deny such an amazing opportunity? I mean, if we managed to get the trinket and hit level 70 in this same run, that would be a great way to finish things off. And it was a perfectly standard run, only this time we had very good heals. But we clear up the first boss, then wait 3 years until finally the second boss spawns. But of course, it just wasn't meant to be. But luckily, this run didn't actually get us to level 70, so one more chance for that insane run. So we kill the first boss, wait 3 years, and then start to take down Temperus. And again, no trinket. But it's okay, because this run still didn't get us to level 70. See, I told you the XP sucks in this place. So, one last chance. My XP bar was literally on the edge of max level. So we get to Temperus, my heart racing, just hoping to see it drop. Well, I guess that's that. We had missed the chance for our crazy level 70 run. So we were just simply clearing up the rest of the dungeon, and that's when it happened. I managed to hit level 70 for the first time ever in TBC Classic. So although I wasn't able to get us the trinket, I was still insanely happy. But turns out, this group wanted one extra run. So I thought, screw it, might as well enjoy the level 70 tanking. And I went into the run expecting nothing at this point, but we get Temperus down, and what do I see? 1 hourglass of the Unraveler, and turns out I was the only person in the group that needed it. So sure, I didn't get it in this same run, but this is close enough, right? So hitting level 70 and getting our best trinket, I honestly couldn't think of a better way to end the final day day of the TBC grind. So starting things off, we're going straight into the deep end with this one, because this was literally 5 minutes after I hit level 70, and we're going into my first ever heroic dungeon, and it's the Black Morass. Definitely not the wisest first heroic dungeon, as I was about to find out. Now, like I said in the last video, the Black Morass really isn't all that fun to do. I still really like the whole time traveling thing, because it allows players to visualize parts of the past. But the way this one plays out just isn't really it. You're literally just running back and forth from portals opening, slaying identical mobs. However, this is the heroic version, and I'm told this is one of the harder ones too, which we found out at only the second portal, because the tank got absolutely smacked and so did the warrior. But thanks to my amazing bear tanking skills, we were luckily able to make a recovery. Now, in terms of the loot, this dungeon was actually a pretty huge one. First of all, every single heroic boss drops a badge of justice, a brand new currency that can be exchanged for very, very powerful gear. But not only that, the last boss of this dungeon, Aeonis, can drop the Girdle of the Death Dealer. It's a heroic only piece of gear that gives 28 agility, 20 hit, and 56 attack power. This thing is so insanely good that it's not just pre-base, it's phase 1 base. So out of all of the pieces of gear that we were going to be chasing, this is probably the most important one. So apart from that little hiccup on Portal 2, things were going very smoothly. We even managed to take down the first boss, Chrono Lord Dea, who awarded us with our first ever badge of justice, as well as this very solid tanking cloak. And the same thing goes, the next few portals were very easy, no issues at all. But that's when things came crumbling down. We were on the second boss, Temperus, who is the hardest boss in the dungeon, because he gets this buff called Hasten, which increases melee damage by 200%. And of course on heroic difficulty with a bunch of fresh 70s, that's pretty scary, so it needs to be purged. Unfortunately though, I don't think our healer realised that, and that caused us to wipe. So we all rushed back in an attempt to save Medivh, and luckily we were able to clean up the little ads and re-engage the boss in time. And this time, things were going great, except Medivh went to 1 HP because the next portal actually spawned whilst we were trying to kill the second boss. So we had no choice but to simply let Medivh die and then wait 5 minutes for him to reset. And unfortunately, that meant that we had to start the entire encounter from the very first portal, which I thought would be fine since I wanted the badge of justice anyway. But of course, that's not how it worked, and killing the first boss awards us with literally nothing. So moving on to our third Temperus attempt, I was told by the tank to kill the ads, so that's what I did. In my opinion, I think I could have just let the ads pass and then we nuke the boss, but I'm not one to argue. But again, we ended up dying because apparently the purge wasn't working. But again, that led to the death of Medivh, and we all agreed to give it one last attempt, and if we weren't successful this time, we would just call it. So for the final time, we killed Chrono Lord Dea, cleared up the portals, and started to take down Temperus. But this time, everything went smoothly. Hasten was purged, the tank didn't get one shot, and I stayed on the boss the entire time, and we were able to take him down. And doing that felt fantastic. That was until I remembered that this wasn't even the last boss. And in the normal version, the last boss is by far the scariest and hardest hitting, so I can only imagine what this boss is like on heroic difficulty. Luckily though, myself and the tank had a load of free action potions on us, which is a potion that does exactly what it sounds like. Makes us immune to all stuns, meaning we were able to completely skip the boss's mechanic. And sure, things got a little close at some points, but in the end, we were successful at taking Aeonis down. And he dropped the Girdle of Valorous Deeds, which is the completely wrong belt. But you know what? The tank needed the belt, and honestly, I'd say well deserved, because without this guy guiding us through it all, we would never have been able to clear it. So with our first ever heroic dungeon now completed, I decided to jump into my second ever heroic dungeon. Now at this point, I only had Caverns of Time attuned and the Cenarian Expedition attuned, so I decided to hop into a run of the Underbog, and to my surprise, I instantly got invited to this group. Now one thing that I really like about heroic so far is that it gives us a reason to go back to what is essentially just a leveling dungeon. One of my favourite dungeons in vanilla WoW was Morass, but past that 5 level gap, there really isn't any reason to go back to it. But being able to go back to the likes of Underbog and have a chance at getting epic quality items and badges of justice, it felt awesome. Up first on the list of bosses is Hungerfen. Just like the normal version of this dungeon though, I didn't really notice any mechanics. I can only really assume that this is a tank fight. For his loot though, he dropped the Hungertide gauntlets, and of course gave us our 4th badge of justice. But on the topic of loot though, it's worth noting that there is 0 pieces of loot for us here. But that's the other great thing. It doesn't matter, because we still get badges of justice and progress towards exalted reputation. So no matter what dungeon I did, I really didn't care. I also got a taste of just how hard hitting heroic dungeons really are, because we were killing a bog giant and I accidentally ripped threat, and my health just completely vanished. But moving on to the second boss now, it is Gaz-An, the fearsome Hydra god himself. And I'm not entirely sure what his mechanics are, but the melee were all standing in front of the boss, so I kinda just copied them. I don't think that was the right thing to do though, because he kept spewing some kind of poison onto us. Didn't matter though, since we were able to take him down anyway. For his loot, he dropped the Ring of the Shadow Deeps and a badge of justice. The rest of the dungeon really wasn't that bad. We were able to clear it pretty peacefully. That was until we got towards the end of the dungeon and these Underbog lords were absolutely smacking the tank. But regardless of that, we were successful in reaching the final boss of the dungeon, the Black Stalker. Now as far as this dungeon goes, I'm not a massive fan of this place. I'm just not huge into spaghetti monsters. However, I really like this guy. He's the perfect mix of goofy in my opinion. As for the mechanics, he now spawns little ads that according to the group we were supposed to prioritize. So that's what I did, and we were successful in the end at taking him down. For his loot, he dropped 3 different pairs of pants, 1 for each leg I guess, but that's not actually where we ended things, because we then backtracked a bit and went after the boss Swamp Lord Muselek. And as a few of you pointed out in the first TBC video, I missed this guy out, but he's here now, and he was easily the hardest boss in the dungeon. He was freezing the entire group, and Claw the Bear was constantly charging at people and knocking them back. But of course, we got him down anyway, and his loot was the arm wraps of disdain. And looking at these things, I thought they might actually be quite good for tanking, but in the end I just ended up passing on it. But with the boss now dead, we had officially completed our 2nd ever heroic dungeon. So with a couple of heroic dungeon runs now under my belt, I decided to get to work on the 3rd heroic attunement, and I decided to head over and into the Shadow Labyrinth in order to grind out Lower City reputation. Now like I said in the last video, the Lower City is going to be our most important reputation grind out of all of them, and that's because at some point we will need to go to Exalted so that we can purchase the Shapeshifter Signet. It is a ridiculously powerful ring that offers 25 agility, but more importantly 20 expertise, which is a brand new stat that reduces the chance that mobs will parry or dodge your attacks, kind of like a 2nd hit rating. But that's the end goal. For now, all I really wanted to do was hit Revered, so that we had a few more heroic dungeon options. Now as far as the dungeons go, I think I've made it pretty clear that I don't particularly enjoy the Ouchenai dungeons. However, this one is definitely the best of them. The whole cultist and demon theme is way more my thing compared to the voidiness. And well, that was it. I spent the next like 5 hours doing nothing but spamming the Shadow Labyrinth. However, at some point I did switch from doing full runs over to doing rep runs, which basically just meant clearing up to the 2nd boss and then resetting, which proved to be way more efficient than trying to clear the entire thing. And in the end, I was successful in getting us to Revered with the Lower City, and I wasted 0 time and went straight to the NPC Nakodu, who sold me the Ouchenai key, and we are now attuned for the Ouchenai heroics. So after seeing how hard hitting and difficult some of the heroic dungeons can be, I decided that it would be best to fill in the gear gaps with stuff from quests and normal dungeons first. And first up on that list is the Cleft Hoof Hide Leggings. 30 strength, 30 agility, some hit and some expertise. This thing is without a doubt the best legs for us right now. None of the other pre-bis pieces come even close to these things. And lucky for us, they come from a simple questline inside of Blade's Edge Mountain. Now, coming here for the first time, I really didn't know what to expect, but it was really cool. I mean, just look at this. Yikes. Poor guy clearly flew straight into this thing and impaled himself. So I flew down to this little settlement called Evergrove, and there are a crap ton of quests here, and I'm told that questing is actually a very good gold farming strategy, but that's for another time. For now, we just needed to get those legs. For the first quest, we actually had to turn in a quest item picked up from a mini boss. However, this guy also offers a quest to kill that exact mob, so why not do it at the same time, right? So I made the 30 seconds flight trip down to this ogre infested area and slayed the mob Durnholde, who of course dropped the item we needed to start the quest chain. So I took it back to Commander Stonewall, which sent us towards the center of the zone where we found the NPC Baron Sablemane, who was going to be our main quest giver for this chain. And he wanted us to bring him 7 Crustburster Venom Glands. And I assume they get their name because they really like doing that. It was a nice and simple task though, nothing too out of the ordinary. So I handed the quest into Baron Sablemane, and he now wanted us to steal a sack from a giant elite mob. This one was pretty interesting though. What we had to do was use a sleeping powder provided to us by the quest giver to put Grurlock to sleep. We can then sneak in and steal the sack. It was a short quest, but different to the usual murder everything type of quest. The follow-up quest only wanted us to go back to Commander Stonewall, who then sent us over to the east for, again, a bit of a different type of quest. We had to plant a trap at the stone altar thingy, which attracted Gorgram the Dragon Killer, and it killed him. Awesome. So moving on to the last couple of quests now, it is of course elite quests. So with the help of the LFG tool, I was luckily able to find myself a couple of players to do it with. As far as elite quests go though, it really wasn't anything massively interesting. We had to kill 10 Bladespine Enforcers, 5 Battle Mages and 5 Ravagers, and finally a mini boss called Fingrom. And the quest description said it was for 3 players, however we did it as 5 and it was an absolute breeze. I then handed the quest in and started up the final quest in the chain, and again it was another elite quest where we had to kill the scary mob Gawk, and he was absolutely smacking me, so we just let the NPC tank him instead and we were able to take him down. I then returned to the quest giver for the very last time, and just like that we had acquired our best in slot legs. So with our second piece of pre-base in hand, it was time for us to head into Mechanor Normal. So going into this one, again, I didn't really know what to expect. I was obviously thinking of some kind of mechanical theme due to the name, but I think the best way to describe it is crystal-y. But it's filled with blood elves and massive mechanical constructs, which I thought was pretty cool. Almost immediately after entering the dungeon, we are standing in front of what is technically a boss. There's 2 of these big guys, and whilst neither of them dropped any loot, they both have a chance at dropping either a blue jagged crystal or a red jagged crystal. And if you get one of each, you can combine them to make a key to unlock a chest for an extra piece of loot, which I think is a really cool idea. I like when there's optional things to do inside of dungeons, rather than it just being one straight path every single time. So whilst we are just clearing our way towards the first boss, the reason we are running this dungeon is purely because of our pre-base chest piece, the Tunic of Assassination. 28 agility, 54 attack power, and 3 gem slots. Gem slots are a really nice addition to gear pieces in my opinion. It really does add an extra bit of customization to your gear, especially for us. We could add agility if we want more crit, some hit maybe if we are still low, or hell, even stamina if I find myself getting smacked a bit too much. Plus it allowed them to add an entirely new profession to the game, which is always great. So moving on to the first boss now, it is Mechanolord Capacitus. Now as far as it goes, this was actually quite a tough fight, purely because I decided to go straight into the run without doing any research on mechanics. And turns out he has quite a similar mechanic as the first boss in Manitombs, where he has a spell reflect kind of thing that also reflects melee damage. Plus there was these floating balls that seemed to randomly explode. For his loot, he dropped the Thorium Weave Cloak, a very tanky piece of gear. So I quickly checked Wowhead to see if it was good for bear tanking, and turns out it is pre-base for mitigation. So of course I needed on it, and we won. So even if we didn't get the chest we needed, we at least got something, Right, so moving upstairs onto the second boss now is Nethermancer Sepethria. Again, another somewhat tough fight. She has these fire elementals which are constantly chasing one player around, which unsurprisingly was left up to the hunter to deal with. Other than that, she does like to stun select people every now and then, but overall, a pretty fun fight. For the loot, she dropped the one-handed axe Stellaris. So moving on into the next section now, this is a pretty annoying part of the dungeon, because throughout this entire hallway, you are constantly being ambushed by waves of mobs, and you are kept in combat throughout, meaning you aren't allowed to drink up. But in the end of that hallway lies the last boss of the instance, Pathalion the Calculator. Some pretty weird sounding names in this dungeon, I can't lie, but he is of course the boss that can drop our beautiful new chest piece. His mechanics though, he didn't really do a whole lot. He spawned some ads that I initially started to take down, but everyone else was just attacking the boss. So I just did the exact same thing. And that was it. We had cleared our first ever run of Mechanar. And of course, the chest piece in fact didn't drop. But that wasn't going to stop me, because over the next like day and a half, I would live inside Mechanar, running it over and over again in an attempt to get that chest piece. And let me tell you, this thing really didn't want to drop. I did an unbelievably large amount of runs in this dungeon. I don't even know how many runs I did because I just stopped counting at some point. But fast forward a day and a half and God knows how many runs, and finally the chest dropped. And of course it happened at a time that I wasn't recording. But regardless, I was still incredibly happy. So like I said earlier, in TBC there are now gem slots added to certain pieces of gear. Now originally, I thought it worked like a red slot had to be filled with a red gem and a blue slot had to be filled with a blue gem, etc. But turns out that's not true at all, and you can actually shove whatever gems you wanted into whatever slots you wanted. And sure, I wasn't currently hit capped, but I decided to shove 3 delicate living rubies into it to give us a massive 24 extra agility. And although it was like 300 gold, I still think it'll be worth it in the long run. So with a couple more pieces of pre-base gear in hand, I decided that it was time to jump back into some heroic dungeons, and this time we are going after the slave pens. Truth be told, the only reason I was in here was because my guild leader asked if I wanted to come, and this ended up being a very unique experience, because most of the time when it comes to dungeons, you just kill the mobs until you get to the end. However, we didn't do that. We avoided as many mobs as we possibly could. We actually only ended up killing these 2 mobs here. We then killed Menu the Betrayer and collected our badge. But as we got up top, we actually jumped off the bridge and down onto this little area, where we made an attempt to jump onto the ledge. However, me being me, I missed the jump, and I tried to charge the boss in bear form, but of course that didn't work. So I drowned myself, and luckily they were able to send me a res. And I think we attempted to soothe the mobs here and sneak past, but we ended up just having to kill them. But we make our way up and use this little hidey hole to let the patrol mobs past, and then sneak past the crabs and on to the final boss. Now, I'm not saying that this wasn't fun to do. In fact, it was very fun. It was just not what I expected when I got asked to come to the slave pens. But regardless, it's very quick to do, which means it's a nice and easy source of badges of justice. So the other thing that was constantly on my mind was of course the Karazhan attunement. And for the next part of it, we had to head over and into the Arcatraz. Now this one wasn't really much of a burden to do or anything, and that's because the normal version of this dungeon holds our pre-base gloves, which are the gloves of the Unbound. 27 agility, 38 attack power, and 2 gem slots. They are the best non-hit gloves we have access to. The actual base hit gloves are rather expensive, and I happen to be rather poor. So these are the ones I'll be going after. As far as the dungeon goes though, it felt incredibly similar to Mechanar, with all the crystal stuff and big constructs, except this one was a wee bit more focused on demons and stuff, which I've said in the past I much prefer. Moving on to the first boss now, it is this big void guy called Zeraketh the Unbound. Now unfortunately, whilst this group were very friendly, the tank we had just could not hold threat to save his life. And I'm not being unreasonable here, right? I mean, I really shouldn't have to spam cower whilst doing 300 DPS. And for whatever reason, he just did not want to give anyone Blessing of Salvation. We asked pressed for it at least 3 or 4 times. But regardless, we pressed on anyway, until we were at the next boss, Delia the Doomslayer. She's a succubus type of thing with 6 arms and an interesting appearance. Her mechanic was a very simple whirlwind ability. I mean, if I had 6 arms, I would probably want to spin uncontrollably as well. For her loot, she ended up dropping a fist weapon called Reflex Blades. I've always found it kind of weird that I'm able to equip these kinds of things, because why would I put claws on my claws? But after taking her down, we actually move straight into the next boss, Rathsquire Socothrates. And this is the boss that can drop our amazing Prebis gloves. And he was also quite a fun fight. He had this dash ability which leaves behind a flaming trail of fell fire, and as a classic player, my first instinct is to jump straight into said fire, but I resisted that urge and we were able to take him down. And what do I see? 1 Gloves of the Unbound. So although we had a terrible tank, we managed to get the Karazhan quest done and our Prebis gloves. So at this point, I really didn't care what happened. So we make our way over to the final boss, Harbinger Skyrus. Now, I thought this was a really cool boss. From my understanding, he controls these prison cells which hold some of Outland's most powerful creatures, such as the man himself, Millhouse Manastorm. And to my understanding, this was the first time Millhouse Manastorm had made an appearance, so this was really cool to see. But the mobs themselves were actually giving us quite a bit of issue, because again, myself and the priest had aggro, which could have been prevented if we had salvation, and obviously that caused us to wipe. And after respawning, the tank then rage quit on us, and of course we did give it a go as a 4-man, but I didn't have any of my tanking gear on me at the time, and in the end it just wasn't enough. So although it was a shame for the rest of the group, at least we got what we needed done. So after a very lucky Alcatraz run, it was once again time to head into some heroic dungeons, and we were going back to the Black Morass. To be honest, it wasn't really my choice. I was invited by the main character of last week's video, Mr. Schlong. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because at this point we've done this dungeon a minimum of 50 times, but it was an incredibly smooth run. Mr. Schlong is not only a fantastic player, but has some of the best gear for only the second week of TBC. We had absolutely 0 issues on the first boss and the second boss. No trinket, by the way. And again, we all decided to pop free action potions on the final boss, which just made it an absolute breeze. But remember, this boss drops what we are here for, the Girdle of the Death Dealer. It is the most important piece of dungeon loot for us since it is base until phase 2. Even then, in phase 2 it's like the 3rd best option. But we get Aeonis down and there it was. Staring right back at me was our phase 1 best in slot belt, and I was the only person rolling on it. I was so incredibly happy getting our pre-bis gloves and then getting our phase 1 base belt an hour later. I'm sure you can imagine how that felt. But not only that, we had now amassed 15 total badges of justice. And sure, that doesn't seem like very much, but I decided to already cash them in on possibly the biggest piece of loot for us, and that is none other than the Everbloom Idol. Considering the fact that Shred is like 40% of our damage, being able to add 88 to that is absolutely insane. It's so insane that it is the best in slot for the entire of the Burning Crusade, and for only 15 badges, I'd say money well spent. The next thing that I decided to work on was getting our best in slot ring, and like I said earlier, that is the Shapeshifter's Signet. Now luckily, we were already revered, so we really didn't have that much left to do, and this wasn't something that I sat and grinded for hours and hours. It's more something I passively did over a couple days every time I had a spare half hour, and it was pretty much never full runs, mostly rep runs which just go up to the second boss and then reset, which in total would get like 1500 to 2000 rep every run. So after 2 days of doing that, I did manage to get us to Exalted level with the lower city. So of course, I wasted no time and rushed over to Nakodu and picked up our brand new ring. And the other thing is that I finally managed to scrape together enough gold to purchase our pre-base weapon, and that is the Staff of Natural Fury, for the low price of 1200 gold. Now the interesting thing about this weapon is that obviously it gives us a stupidly large amount of attack power, but also it reduces the mana cost of our shape-shifting abilities by 200. And sure, we will definitely be replacing this thing in the near future. However, this weapon is in constant use throughout TBC for those really long fights. So 100% a worthy purchase. So now that we are pretty stacked on pre-base gear, all we really had left to do now was to run heroic dungeons for those last few pieces of loot. However, as many of you know, during the launch of TBC, there was an armor bug that made pretty much all mobs have way less armor than they should have, and in turn, I was doing way more damage than I should have been. And now that that is fixed, no one wants to invite a cat to their group, and I stood in Shattrath for way over an hour spamming people wanting to do dungeons, and I couldn't tank it either, since at this point my tanking gear was way outdated. But I did manage to find a solution, introducing Linfarrow. He is a good friend of mine, and he has offered to tank some heroic dungeons for me, and first stop is heroic Durnholde. Now, like I said in the previous video, the heroic version of this dungeon is also a very important one, and that is because of the Nightfall wrist guards. And sure, these don't offer any hit, but the stats on these are just so good that they are also best in slot for the entire of phase 1. So as far as the dungeon goes, the heroic version really wasn't any different than the normal version, except everything hits a lot harder. So we managed to kill Lieutenant Drake no issues, and then freed Thrall from his prison cell. Captain Scarlock, on the other hand, was a little bit more scary, because on normal, his consecration doesn't really do that much, and you could probably just stand in it as long as you want. However, on heroic, his consecration is the scariest part, and standing in it for more than a couple seconds can definitely mean death. For his loot, he dropped Dath Rohan's ceremonial hammer. Now, I know this is a healing piece of gear, but according to Linfarrow, this is really good for us in PvP, so I needed on it, which no one else seemed to mind. We then traverse through Durnholde and clear up the Tyron Mill lookouts and move on to the final encounter. Now, lucky for me, I was actually very useful in this situation, because these dragon guys hit extremely hard. However, my sleep ability does work on them. But eventually, Epoch Hunter comes down, and to be honest, he felt like the easiest boss out of the three, and we managed to get him down. And on the very first run, what do I see? Nightfall bracers. I couldn't believe it. Me getting a piece of loot on the very first run? That is unheard of. And at this point, all we actually needed to be full pre-base was a ring, shoulders, neck, and trinket. The second dungeon we went into was the heroic Black Morass, because it's right next to Durnholde, but also because Linfarrow was full pre-base except for the belt from here. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but it was an absolute breeze, because Linfarrow at the time had, I think, 19,000 armor. Dude was an actual meat wall. Unfortunately though, we get Aeonis down, and sadly there was no belt for my boy. For the third and final dungeon, we decided to do heroic Ouchenai Crypts, and that's because our pre-base shoulders come from here, and that is the Waste Walker shoulder pads. And sure, the intention behind this piece of gear I am almost certain was for rogues to use it. However, stat wise, this piece of gear alone is miles better than anything else. As far as the dungeon goes though, this one was actually a bit difficult. Fidgety is a good word to use for it, because there wasn't a massive amount of mobs everywhere, but the ones that were here hit stupidly hard, plus they all love to spawn in these smaller elite mobs. Moving on to the first boss now is Shattrath the Dead Watcher. So he doesn't gain any new abilities or anything, but his damage is just jacked up an insane amount. Throughout the entire fight, his bite ability just kept going and going. It felt almost like it was a clock, slowly ticking away at your health bar. But regardless, we were successful at getting him down. And moving on now to what is possibly the most annoying trash mobs in the entire game, and I'm still not 100% sure on how these guys work. It's like they can't be tanked or something like that anyway. So we clear up the massive skeleton packs no bother and move on to the final boss, Exarch Maladar. Now during the normal version, I said it would be cool if the second boss also dropped a piece of loot. Well, in the heroic version, he does, and that is where our shoulders come from. But we get him down, and sadly no shoulders. But you know what? I can't really complain, since we did manage to get our best in slot bracers from Durnholde. So doing these 3 heroic dungeons kinda became our little daily routine. Every day Linfarrow would take me into some heroic dungeons, and honestly I can't thank him enough, because there was just no way I would have been making any progress without him. On day number 2, Aeonis again didn't want to drop his belt for my friend, and Exarch Maladar didn't drop the shoulders for me. Day number 3 was unfortunately the same story for Linfarrow. As for Exarch Maladar though, we get him and his ugly transparent friend down, and the shoulders finally dropped. which means all we need now is a trinket, ring, and neck piece. As for our rings, the best one would actually come from a boss inside of Manitombs called Yor, and it is the Shaffar's Band of Brutality. However, turns out Yor is a boss that actually needs to be summoned, and it was unlikely that anyone would be doing that this early into TBC. So our next best option was the Overseer's Signet, which luckily we would be able to get by simply completing a questline in Netherstorm. And first up on that short list of quests was killing some Sun Fury Blood Elves. Now I believe doing this questline was actually my first time questing in Netherstorm, and I gotta say, not a huge fan. It has the same voidy crystalliness that we've seen quite a lot so far. It's just not really my type of thing, which is fine because TBC has so many different aesthetics and it would be silly if I liked every single one of them, right? The quest itself was quite a chill one, nothing more than a simple kill quest. I did however watch this mage obliterate a giant pack of mobs that he pulled. So I handed the quest in at area 52, which then sent us over to a big crystallized building, where all we had to do was turn in and accept the quest, which then wanted us to shut down whatever this big piece of technology is. All we actually had to do was guard it from these Sun Fury attackers for a couple minutes. And the next two quests were literally exact copies of this one, and the third and final quest was also the exact same, except it was an elite version. So I teamed up with a nearby shaman, and together we fought back the hordes of these gremlin things. I then returned to area 52, and we have now acquired our pre-base ring. So apart from that, all we really needed to do now was get a trinket and neck piece. And well, I was so close to getting the 41 badges of justice that we needed for the Bloodlust brooch, and luckily Mr. Tyan once again invited me back for a skip run of the slave pens, which would be enough. And it wasn't anything massively exciting, just the usual 20 minutes in and out type of stuff. But excitedly, I rushed my way back to Shattrath city and paid a visit to Geras, who sold me our pre-base trinket. So all we really had to do now was get ourselves a neck piece of some kind. However, that will have to wait for another video. Tonight is raid night, and for our first ever TBC raid, we were heading balls deep into Gruul's lair. Now this one, and Magtheridon's lair, is very much like Anixia's lair from vanilla, because there's only one big bad scary boss in each of them. Well, except for Gruul's lair, because there's actually two of them. And the first one is Mulgar. This is a pretty interesting one, because Mulgar comes with, I believe, 4 ads that all need to be tanked. We've got a mage tanking, warlocks enslaving, a bunch of stuff that I didn't understand. And originally, I was supposed to be tanking one of these guys, but in the end, the raid leaders just said, nuke the boss. Now, the way we did this boss, I don't think was the intended way, because what we did was completely ignore Mulgar's ads and just nuked him as much as possible, because everyone wanted to get the best parse they possibly could. However, I completely messed mine up. I was just too nervous going into it, and I completely ruined my rotation. As for soft reserves, we all get 2 soft reserves across both Gruul's lair and Magtheridon, and I put both of them into the tier tokens for the chest and shoulder. Yes, I couldn't believe it either. Feral druids actually have a tier set this time. Plus they are both the best stat wise, so even if it didn't have the set bonus stapled to it, chances are they would still be best. So moving on now to the big bad boss of the raid, Gruul the Dragon Slayer, and this time I was determined to actually parse well. And well, surprisingly, I was the top DPS. Can you believe it? Unfortunately, people were asking for innervates whilst being a million miles away from me. People were dying and needed battle resed, and in the end, it completely messed up my parse. Also, no DST. So moving on to Magtheridon now. For this raid, I was completely banned from parsing because I was assigned to tank one of the ads in full agility cat gear. And well, everything was starting to feel quite laggy, and basically the second Magtheridon came online, my internet decided that this was a perfect time to start an update. But I came back and luckily was still alive and was able to finish the fight with a massive 89 parse. But getting to the most exciting part now, rolling on the loot. And I didn't notice at the time, but the tier token for our shoulders did in fact drop, and I managed to get a massive 25 roll. Moving on now to the big one, and of course, it was Karazhan. And I can't lie, it felt a little weird, because unlike any of the raids I've ever done, this was a 10-man raid. It felt a lot like I was heading in for a UBRS run, and unfortunately for me, I was banned from parsing in this raid because I was off tanking in full agility cat gear. And whilst we are just clearing out the cellar, let's talk a little bit about soft reserves. Firstly, the gloves of dexterous manipulation. Yes, I too thought gloves of deafness would be BIS, but no, turns out these things are. Secondly, the Edgewalker long boots. These boots are by far the best option we have access to, for both stats and for hit. And lastly, these Skulker's greaves. These legs are so unbelievably good. They are BIS all of phase 1 and 2 and are still pretty decent in phase 3, so definitely one of the most important pieces of loot. So with all that out of the way, it's time for the first boss of Karazhan, Attunement the Huntsman. Now, like I said before, I was indeed banned from parsing because I had to off tank, but to be honest, I don't think I was needed at all. I barely held threat from Tyan. Very excitingly though, we get him down and his mount dropped on the first week. This must have been a world first, right? Now, I just gotta say, Karazhan as a whole was so awesome. I loved this aesthetic, killing undead and ghosts in a haunted castle. I mean, there was even like skeletal waiters and shit. That's like the perfect mix of goofy but cool. But moving on to the second boss now, it is Morass. This is a very important boss for us because he can drop both gloves of dexterous manipulation and Edgewalker long boots. However, things didn't really go to plan on the first pull. A few people died right off the bat, and I genuinely don't think I'm tanky enough for this. So of course, we ended up wiping, but on the second attempt, I was told just to swipe the ads as much as possible, which apparently worked because we were able to get it down. For the loot, neither of the pieces we wanted dropped. The next 10 minutes was a really big ad clearing section, where we also stopped off inside of this room to pick up some kind of book, which I believe was for the Nether Spike questline. But eventually, we did make our way onto the third boss, Maiden of Virtue, and I was luckily able to parse on this boss. And while the first boss I was allowed to DPS on was in fact my first 100 parse of TBC. Now granted, it didn't last very long. I think it was less than 4 hours later someone else had already parsed better than me, but it was still cool at the time. For the fourth boss, it was the Opera event. This was a bit of a strange one because it is one of, I think, 3 different bosses that can spawn. It's a cool idea though, being up on stage in front of tens of ghostly visitors, but again, I really don't think I was needed to tank on this boss. Tyan could easily solo tank this, I think. And the reason I know that is because I didn't get threat once. For the fifth boss of the raid, it is this big construct guy called the Curator. This one felt a little out of place because there was a giant construct in what is supposed to be a haunted castle. No complaints though, he was still pretty cool, and I thought I was supposed to be tanking these little ads that spawned, but looking back on that now, I honestly don't think I was supposed to. But even then, I was still the top DPS and managed to get a 99 parse. It feels really weird to say that, to be honest, because in vanilla we barely ever got close to the top of the DPS meter. So clearing our way through the library now, there is a really cool little mechanic in here, and that's the books that can spawn. They are consumable items that give a load of different stats. I think some of them give spell hit and crits, extra armor and damage, stuff like that. And sure, they aren't massively impactful, I don't think, but I like when there's small things like this inside of instances. So moving on now is the sixth boss, and it is Terestian Ilhoof. Now he's also quite a big one for us because he can actually drop Terestian's Strangle Staff, our actual best in slot weapon. And the reason I didn't SR it is because we are the only druid, so if it dropped, it would automatically go to us. Doesn't matter anyway because it never even dropped. Basically, right around the corner from Ilhoof is the 7th boss, Shade of Aran. Now I won't lie, I went into this raid having done zero research on mechanics, and while I was told to just pick up one of the ads, however my stupid ass decided that it would be an amazing idea to charge straight into one of the boss's blizzards. I'm telling you man, I'm really not cut out for this tanking business. But regardless, the boys were able to take a run down, and we moved on over to the second last boss of the instance, Netherspite. Now at the time, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was told to stand in the green beam on the first phase, which went fine, but on the second phase, I was told to stand in the red beam, which I believe causes you to take 100% aggro. Despite me having only 4000 armor, it actually went okay, I think. All I got back when I asked how I did was, "You did fine, cat." But of course, since it is me playing this game, our Skulker's Greaves didn't drop. Now, when it comes to doing new raids and stuff, I quite often say no idea what was going on, which is true because I don't like doing mechanics research. But imagine my confusion when we started playing chess. Genuinely, not a clue what was going on. Even now, weeks later when we do this boss, I don't know what to do. I just find the nearest thing and start swinging, which apparently works quite well because the boys were able to take it down. But just upstairs from that lies the last boss of the instance, Prince Malchezaar. Now, this is a name that I actually knew because I've heard stories of how Prince Malchezaar somehow got Gorehowl, which I believe is an axe that was wielded by Grommash and then Thrall and then Garrosh. So it was really cool to actually see this guy in person. The fight itself really wasn't that difficult though, and we were able to take him down with 0 deaths. Now of course, there is another boss in the raid, Nightbane, which is a boss that needs to be summoned. However, that is a story for another video. But for now, it is time for us to roll on the loot. And first off, the Worgen Claw Necklace. Despite my add-on telling me that it's the 4th best for ferals, it's almost identical to our base hit neck. And remember, the next piece is the only part we needed to upgrade, so this would be absolutely massive for us. So I hit main spec and got a huge 4 roll. But hey, maybe we still win on the mount. I mean, I'd much prefer that, but unfortunately, I rolled 57, losing to a 93 roll. So congrats to Fuminori. But you know what? Despite getting literally 0 loot from this raid, it was honestly such a cool raid and fun raid to do. This might actually be my favorite so far, despite it being just a 10-man. So overall, I would say that this is a fantastic way to kick off the Burning Crusade. So starting the day off, we're actually going straight into Karazhan. Truth be told, I was actually supposed to put these raids into the last druid video, but just ended up not. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but the reason I wanted to show you this raid specifically was because we did manage to get some very spicy loot. And whilst we were talking about loot, soft reserves. Firstly, Skulker's Greaves. These legs are so unbelievably good. They aren't just best for phase 1, they are also best for phase 2 and are still pretty damn solid in phase 3. Secondly, the Edgewalker long boots. Again, these are best for us not only in phase 1 but also in phase 2 and are second best in phase 3. Thirdly, the Drape of the Dark Reavers. Same story really, it's best all of the way until phase 3. Now obviously there is a lot of other stuff that we could be looking for inside of Karazhan, but these are like the big 3. Now, as many of you know, towards the end of vanilla, I have become a bit of a parsing fiend, and I was able to get rank 1 feral in AQ 40. Now don't get me wrong, I do like just chilling out and questing. It's one of my favourite things to do in this game, but I also enjoy doing the min-maxing and big endgame stuff, and my goal with this character currently is to get rank 1 in Karazhan. Will I actually be able to do that? Probably not. And at the time of recording this, it was only the 2nd week of Karazhan. And what we were doing for Nether Spite was rotating people on the blue beam, just so that everyone could get their 99. And well, this week was my turn. And I can't lie, I had 0 idea what that actually meant. I was just told stand in the blue beam until the boss dies. I never realized that meant I was going to be able to get up to 4k damage. And unsurprisingly, this was indeed my second 100 parse of TBC. But not only that, Nether Spite did in fact drop the Skulker's Greaves, which I would say is probably our biggest piece of gear in the entire phase. So we do chess events and move on to Prince Malchezaar. Nothing massively interesting happened, no big parses or anything. Although we did actually wipe on our first attempt at him. But who cares about all that, right? The loot is the most exciting part. So Skulker's Greaves were called to roll, and I managed to get a huge 95 roll, beating the other 2 players. I know, isn't that crazy? Me getting loot. Can you believe it? But genuinely, this is a huge upgrade. This is going to make gearing in phase 2 way more comfortable. We also went and did the part of the Nightbane questline, which I wasn't on. But fast forward a week and we were of course back in Karazhan. Our soft reserves were actually the exact same, except since now that we have Skulkers, we have now replaced them with the Gorona's Signet Ring. Because currently, I wasn't hit capped, and the ring would definitely help us get caught up on that. So we kill Attunement the Huntsman and move on to doing Morass. Now, funny thing about Morass, this was, at least for me, an extremely hard boss to parse well on. Because of all the ads, it makes it pretty difficult to actually see what direction Morass is actually facing, and because of his gouge mechanic, 9 times out of 10, I would be second on the threat meter. So when the tank gets gouged, he would automatically go to me, and then I get one shot. Now luckily this time that didn't happen, although I still didn't manage to get a big parse, but he did end up dropping the Edgewalker Longboots. How exciting. As for the rest of the raid, it was pretty standard. I managed to get a good couple of 99s here and there, and that's also another thing that I really like about parsing. It's a great way to see yourself improve as the weeks go on. But who cares, right? We're all about the loot. And well, I did manage to get an 89 roll. I mean, this is unheard for me. 2 weeks in a row that I got loot. Had my curse finally been lifted? Well, the short answer is no. So a nice couple of raids to start us off. But now it's time to start working on something else now. And that is getting Exalted with the Aldor. Because at Exalted, we are able to purchase ourselves the Greater Inscription of Vengeance. Now it's not actually our best in slot shoulder enchant. The ones from Saffron are. But is it really worth the hassle for such a tiny upgrade? And honestly, good luck finding an axe group. And well, yes, I did attempt to do some world farming and quests and stuff, but to be honest, I really hate rep farming. So good thing I'm financially irresponsible, because I went and spent over 1,000 gold on just buying my way to Exalted. Was it worth it for one enchant that I didn't even immediately use? Probably not. But on the topic of enchantments, like I said in one of the prior druid videos, I am currently an enchanter, so that I can get myself the ring enchants. So I ran all the way back to Karazhan and visited the ethereal NPC that stands right before Netherspite and purchased myself the recipe. Now the reason that I actually hadn't done this yet was because in order to craft the enchant, you need a runed adamantite rod. And at first, I thought we needed 8 primal mites to craft one, which would have been another 1,000 gold that I just didn't really want to spend. Yeah, well my stupid ass eventually realized it was actually only the one that we needed. But the random grinds don't end quite there. If you have watched the last druid video, then you will know that I mentioned the only piece of gear that we still needed to upgrade was our neck piece. And well, if you can get yourself to Exalted with the Consortium, then you can purchase the Haramad's Bargain. And okay, sure, it doesn't get us any more hit that we desperately needed, but even if we do get Worgen Claw Necklace, we can still use this one in a 6% hit set. And like I said before, I really hate rep grinding. So of course, I just decided to buy myself up to Exalted with this one too. This was a very expensive day. This one was a bit different though, because instead of just handing something in, we actually use these prison keys that you get from daily quests in Netherstorm. You open a prison cell and a random mob jumps out of it. Kill it and you are guaranteed at least a green BOE and a prisoner ID tag, which can then be turned in for some rep. And to be honest, this one wasn't actually that bad, since it's at least somewhat interesting. Plus, just look at all of those BOEs we were getting, which was extremely satisfying to disenchant. But after like an hour and 1,500 gold later, I was eventually able to get us our brand new neck piece. So now that that garbage is out of the way, we are actually heading down for a run of heroic slave pens. Now obviously at this point we aren't after any loot or anything, apart from maybe some badges of justice, because you can never have too many of those. But what we are here for is the Serpent Shrine Cavern Attunement quest, which yes, is a phase 2 raid. And is it maybe a little bit early for that? Well, no. Okay, maybe a little. I just like being prepared, that's all. But for the first step in the attunement process, we have to visit an NPC inside of the slave pens on heroic difficulty, who then gives us a quest to pick up 2 different signets from both Gruul and Magtheridon, which we're going to do anyway, right? So whilst I was honed in on doing attunements, I decided to get to work on the other Phase 2 attunement for the raid The Eye, or Tempest Keep as it's more commonly known, and this one is ridiculously long. I mean, look at this list. We have to do every single one of these in order to simply enter the raid, and apparently I have completed a couple of the first quests in the chain. Don't remember doing that, but I won't complain. So I made my way over to Shadowmoon Valley to continue the quest chain where I had apparently left off. And the first quest did actually offer some pretty interesting quest rewards. It was a bunch of different food buff items. And sure, it's not a huge deal or anything, but it's free and definitely helps out since my entire raiding budget for this phase is about 15 gold. The quest itself was actually a pretty unique one. We had to use a whistle whilst being near the tubers, and if there was a nearby hellboar, it would come over and dig it up for us. So I handed that in and claimed my free stack of food buffs and got to work on the next quest. Now, as far as it goes, you guys know that I'm not the greatest at reading quest text or anything, but when it comes to the big quest chains, like attunement ones, I do actually really like to read them. By far, my favourite quest chain was the Onyxia attunement one, so there's no reason for me to not like this one too, right? Which is true. This was a really cool quest chain. Oronok talks about how he was once a lieutenant of Gul'dan, and Gul'dan used a corrupted tome to sever the elemental bonds that the Draenor orcs once had. But after Illidan took over the Black Temple, he found it and he split it into 3 fragments. And Oronok sent his 3 boys to find the fragments. And of course, now it's our job to find Oronok's 3 boys and recover the Cipher of Damnation. I think that's what's happening anyway. At the very least, I think I'm on the right track. The first of his boys is Grom Tor, who tells us that the first fragment is located in a chest at Coilscar Point. So of course, it's our job to go and find it by slaying the nearby Naga and praying that we loot one of the keys. We then use the keys that we find to open up a bunch of chests and once again pray that the quest item is inside. Unfortunately, this wasn't a guaranteed drop sort of thing, but it wasn't all that difficult and took us only exactly 7 minutes to complete. The second of Oronok's sons is Artor, who unfortunately seems to be a little bit dead. Of course, the right thing for us to do in this situation is return his corpse to his father. So I ran over and picked up the key from this succubus and set Artor's body free, which causes his spirit to linger, because he says he cannot leave until we have recovered the second part of the Cipher of Damnation. So off we go, hand in hand, to slay a giant tentacle eye called Veneratus the Many, who drops us the second part of the Cipher of Damnation. That then of course causes Artor's spirit to be free, and he tells us that we should inform his father of his passing and that Artor sees the glorious hunting grounds and he waits for him there. What a touching story. The third son is called Borak. Now the other 2 mini quest chains all seem to be pretty straightforward. However, the third one was definitely the most in-depth out of all of them. We first had to set down a bundle of blood thistle, which if I'm not mistaken is basically just blood elf crack, which we are using to basically distract envoy Ikaris so that we can kill him and take the Storm Rage missive. Next, what we had to do was kill a load of the Eclipsing blood elves in order to acquire some of their armor so that Borak could create us a disguise. We then used that disguise to infiltrate Eclipse Point and talk with Grand Commander Rusk. We ask him to move the cipher to Zulahead. He then gets pissed off because we don't have a missive to give him. We then threaten him, and then he agrees. Basically the same as any interaction you'll have in a UK pub. So I return to Borak, who now tells us we have to ambush them as they are transporting the cipher. However, this is now an elite quest. So I teamed up with a couple of nearby players to take it down. We did luckily have a tank and a healer, which is all we really needed to successfully take it down. We then all returned to Oronok, who gave us this very, very nice piece of gear, the Umber Howl's Collar, which is not only pre-base for bear tanking, but is still pretty decent, even next to all of the raid loot. But with the Cipher of Damnation now once again whole, we have to take it to the Altar of Damnation and read the words, which summons the the boss, Cyrock. And even just looking at the amount of health this guy had, I honestly wasn't 100% sure if we were going to be able to kill it. And to make it just that little bit worse, we still only had 4 players. But we decided to just engage it anyway, and whatever happened, happened. And it was going fine until a random horde druid decided to ruin it for us by attacking me. But I respawned and the group had luckily managed to keep him engaged. So with me as a tank and a fresh innervate on the healer, we were eventually successful as a group of 4. And that was it. We were finally done with the Cipher of Damnation quest chain. Now the next part of the attunement would unfortunately require us to do a bunch of different heroic dungeons, which is something that we will worry about later. Because for now, it is time for us to head back into Karazhan. So, soft reserves. Of course, now that we have both Skulker's Greaves and Edgewalker Longboots, my weekly reserves are now Garona's Signet Ring, Drape of the Dark Reavers, and also the Gloves of Dexterous Manipulation. Yes, I know some of you might be thinking that the Grips of Deafness are superior, but I'm here to tell you that they are in fact not. Now don't get me wrong, expertise is an incredibly good stat, but for us, it's kinda just not, because we auto attack every second and it's just too fast for us to really care. Now this raid in particular was kind of an interesting one, because I believe that this raid was the first time that I had ever killed Nightbane. Not gonna lie though, he's an incredibly annoying boss to fight. He's constantly flying around above us and spawning skeletons to attack us. As for his loot, there is absolutely nothing we could possibly need from him, so he's nothing but another parse for us. So we just clear through the raid like every other week until we are at the boss Terestian Illhoof. This is probably my favourite fight so far, to be honest. Not only is it a cleave fight, but when his little imp companion dies, he makes Illhoof take 25% additional damage, which can make the damage numbers go ever so slightly insane. This kill specifically though was a pretty bad parse for me as far as it goes, but he did end up dropping the Terestian Strangle Staff, which is our best in slot weapon for the entire phase. Now of course I didn't soft reserve it, because we are the only druid in the raid and we are guaranteed to be past it. Now like I mentioned at the start, I am a bit of a parsing fiend, and my goal is to be rank 1 in every current raid, and so far it's not going too bad. I think after this specific raid I did actually manage to get rank 2 feral in Karazhan. Didn't hold it for very long, but for the most part I've been able to stay at least top 5. And that kind of brings me to my next point. I've had quite a few people now kind of question why my logs are so good, and truth be told, I know that I suck at this game on almost every level. However, the one thing that I am good at for some reason is Feral Druid, specifically Cat Spec, because I also suck at bear tanking. And a couple people have asked if I could make like a Feral Druid guide. I don't know if that's something you guys would be interested in, but if it is, let me know. So with another weekly raid cleared, it was time to get back to the Tempest Keep attunement, and the next steps would involve completing 3 Trial of the Naru quests, which means we have to take down 4 different heroic dungeons. The Shadow Labyrinth, which is apparently quite an easy one, the Steam Vault, which is also quite easy, the Shattered Halls, which will definitely be interesting to do on a Feral Druid, and the Arcatraz, which I believe is the hardest heroic dungeon in the entire game. However, currently, I wasn't attuned for the Shattar Heroics or Honor Hold dungeons, so I decided to first get to work on the Shattar rep inside of the dungeon, the Botanica. Now luckily, this was only going to take us a couple of hours to get done, because I had managed to rack up quite a solid amount of rep whilst we were farming out the Tunic of Assassination inside of the Mechanar. As for the loot inside here, of course, we do not need anything, because we are far too cool for that. We are here purely because of the rep. And as a whole, I do actually quite enjoy the Botanica. I really like the whole vibe of it. The Sunstrider Blood Elves, I believe, took this place from the Naru and are using it to study and manipulate Outland's flora for arcane power. Pretty cool stuff. It's also not massively difficult. We are able to just turn the brain off and power through it. I do, however, hope that at some point in the future we can do this dungeon as a Warlock or something, because there's a lot of really big packs, and I just think seeing a Seed of Corruption explode reload here would be awesome. It's a fun and pretty chill dungeon to do, and like I said earlier, we really didn't have that much rep left to get, and fast forward 4 or 5 runs, we had managed to reach Revered with the Shattrath. So I rushed back to Shattrath and visited the NPC Almador, and we are now attuned for the Shattrath heroics. And for the last heroic rep grind that we still needed to do was Honor Hold. And the most efficient way for us to do that would be inside of the dungeon, the Shattered Halls. But unlike the Shattrath, I hadn't really gotten any more reps since we had hit Honored whilst leveling. So I ended up having to do like 10 to 12 runs before we had hit Revered. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a good day's worth of grinding. Mainly because finding a group as a feral for this dungeon was an absolute nightmare, because 90% of the pools in this dungeon were massive AoE packs where the mobs fell over almost instantly. The bosses were pretty good though. I was able to just sit back and pump DPS into them. I really can't lie though, this dungeon does start to wear on you a bit after 10 hours, and I think that's because the aesthetic is pretty consistent throughout the entire dungeon, and by that I mean everything in the dungeon looks the same. It's not that bad though, it at the very least kept me busy for a day. But with that grind now completed, that means we are now attuned for every single heroic dungeon in the entire game. So with us now being attuned for every dungeon in the game, it is time for us to start clearing these Trial of the Naru quests. And first stop is Heroic Steam Vaults. Now like I said earlier, this one is quite an easy heroic as far as they go. The mobs basically just have more health and sometimes smack for quite a bit more. However, our group composition was very questionable. We had an LA Shaman, a Boomkin, a Cat, and a Prot Warrior. I mean, who needs crowd control, right? So we get 2 and kill the first boss, Hydromancer Thespia, who dropped us the Moonrage Girdle and a Badge of Justice. And just like every other heroic dungeon, our goal was to skip as many mobs as possible. So using the water walking ability that the Shaman has, we ran through the water tunnels to skip quite a big chunk of the mobs. And not too long after, we were on to and fighting the second boss, which surprisingly went quite well. I thought this one might actually give us a little bit of issues, since he likes to constantly spawn adds in to attack us. For his loot, he dropped a relatively decent looking gun. The following trash mobs, which I also thought would give us at least some kind of issue, were completely fine. And the final boss, Warlord Calathresh, again really wasn't an issue, especially since our group was mostly entirely single target DPS. And for the loot, he did drop an array of pretty nice looking gear, but with Calathresh now dead, we had completed the first part of the Trial of the Naru. But in amongst all of the rep grinding and attunement chaos, it was once again time to raid. And by the way, I was also doing Gruul plus Magtheridon every week, but I was getting 0 loot and not particularly good parses, so I'm not including them. For the soft reserves, we are still on Gloves, Cloak, and the Ring. Now the one thing that I had been struggling with for some reason was parsing on the first 3 bosses. No matter what I did, something seemed to just always go wrong. Like on this maiden kill where I literally ended up tanking her in cat form. I did however manage to get a decent parse this week on Alehoof, 2.3k damage. It's not great, but it's not bad. Still an improvement for sure. Shade of Aran on the other hand went fantastically. He was, I believe, the only boss that I still needed a 99 on, and I managed to get it to 2.2k DPS, which at the time of recording was a top 5 parse. But more excitingly than that, Drape of the Dark Reavers finally dropped, and there was only myself and the rogue who had a soft reserve on it. So we clear up Nether Spite, boring stuff since we weren't allowed on the blue beam this week, and moved on to doing Prince Malchezaar. Now the thing about parsing on this boss is that it does have quite a big RNG factor to it, and that's because of the Enfeeble mechanic, which basically takes 5 random players' health down to 1, and if you were hit by his Shadow Nova ability, you instantly die. So if you get Enfeeble, you have to LOS the Shadow Nova, which means you aren't on the boss 100% of the time, which means you get a far lower parse. And while in this raid, I got insanely lucky, because I only had to do the first Enfeeble, and then I was free to just smack the boss until I couldn't no more. And this was indeed a 100 parse. So even if we lost the roll on the cloak, we did manage to get ourselves some pretty solid parses. And joke's on you, we already rolled it out down at Netherspite. I am so sorry for Minori. I did also get past the Grips of Deafness in this raid, since no one else wanted them, and they are very close to being bis for us. So with one more weekly raid now completed and our gear now looking pretty damn good, it was once again time to head back to doing the Attunement quest. And this time, we are going for the big one, Heroic Architraz. Going into this one, I knew that this was going to be difficult. You really do need a coordinated group to be able to clear this efficiently, and that's why I have assembled a team of my most powerful allies. Mustard Soup, rank 1 Ret Paladin in Vanilla, he is here to carry me towards my attunement. Cool Cat, he may be known for meowing in general chat, but this man is also a fully bissed out meat wall of a tank. Setha, one of our raid leaders, this guy knows just about everything there is to know about WoW Classic. And Worf. Not sure who Worf is, but his name is probably a slur in some language. Now as far as it goes, the trash in this instance wasn't actually that bad. A few of the packs were aids, but as a whole, not too bad. The real killer of this dungeon is the first boss, Zeraketh the Unbound. The damage from this guy is so much that I literally brought about 30 shadow protection potions for everyone. And even with them, our first attempt, we weren't even close. But we were determined to get this done. But sadly, the second attempt was the exact same story. If I recall, it was down to something to do with the healer, and that he just needed to focus on healing the tank instead of trying to keep everyone alive. Our third attempt, we still didn't manage to get it down, but we were so incredibly close. So we gave it a fourth attempt, and our healer sadly died very, very early. But for some reason, no one was taking any damage, and we were successful at taking it down. Now luckily, that's kinda it for Heroic Architraz. The first boss is the hardest by a mile. That's not to say everything went perfectly though. We did have a time where we pulled 2 packs of mobs at once, and in this dungeon, that is a massive no. And we did still have to be careful on the bosses, like with Delia the Doomsayer. When she was spinning around with her whirlwind ability, you really cannot take more than 1 hit before you die. And on Rathscryer Socothrates, the only real thing we had to pay attention to was not standing in the fire, which granted for classic players is pretty difficult. And to be honest, I don't even know how I died. Not the fire, surely. I was nowhere near it. Things were also getting a little bit scary on the fire elementals before the last boss, but eventually we did make it to Harbinger Skyrus. And apparently we managed to get a very easy set of bosses. Now I know I said all we actually had to do was kill the last boss, but actually the quest says we have to clear it whilst Millhouse Manastorm is still alive. Not sure how that works, but I don't think we actually did anything different, and we still managed to get the quest completed. I still think it's funny how the last boss was the easiest one, but with the Architraz now completed, that means we have completed the first of the 3 trials of the Naru. Next up on the list of the trials is Heroic Shattered Halls. Now I knew that going into this one, it was going to be a little bit weird for me, because this dungeon is the AoE dungeon. Every pack is huge with a minimum of like 7 mobs. And well, as a cat DPS, we don't do any AoE at all, except sometimes being able to use Hurricane. So our group composition was literally Spell Cleave featuring Cat. And I know sometimes you guys like to say I'm getting carried. Well, this time I will admit it, I was carried. I was still pumping on bosses though, that's something, right? I did however need to learn my lesson about Frost Novas though, because I kept forgetting that every time the mage would use Frost Nova, that the mobs would instantly start attacking me since I was the only person in melee range. But you know what? It really wasn't that bad. The mage and the warlock definitely had their heads screwed on, and I was able to show off against the bosses. But as a whole, the dungeon really didn't feel that much harder than normal. I mean, sure, everything had more health and hit a little bit harder, but other than that, it felt mostly the same. I mean, if we came in with a physical composition, it might be a different story. The loot was also pretty damn insane. Not only did Mustard get his boots, but he also got his trinket. Plus Beast Lords, which sadly will just be disenchanted. But that also means we have completed the second trial of the Naru. So although we are almost done with the attunement, first we had to head into our first Gruul mag of the video, which means something interesting must have happened, right? So before we get to the bosses, let's quickly talk loot. Now there actually isn't a whole lot of stuff for us, but the few things that there is are very, very important. Of course, Dragonspine Trophy, which we won't ever get. Also the ring from the Magtheridon head quest. But for this raid, and basically every other raid I've done since TBC came out, I have soft reserved the druid tier shoulders and chest. These are so good. These are not only the best stat wise, but they also have the set ability stapled to it, which lets us generate a bit more energy occasionally. As for the parsing, I can't lie, parsing on Gruul mag has been pretty damn rough. Especially with this boss, High King Mulgar. No matter what I do, something always seems to go wrong on this guy. Fairy Fire gets resisted, Mangled misses, or I just get feared to another dimension. But luckily for his loot, he does end up dropping our tier token. Onto Gruul himself now. Parsing on this boss is incredibly difficult. My parses aren't bad on him by any means, but this is a really long fight. And in order to parse on him efficiently, our group really needs to be optimized. And well, if you look at the kill times compared to the top 5, there is definitely quite a big gap. Also, since TBC has came out, DST has been HR'd for one person, and well, we haven't seen a single drop, like at all, and we run 2 IDs per week, and this week was no different. But moving on over to Magtheridon now, this boss is even harder to parse on, and that's because of the cubes. There is a mechanic on this guy that will make him deal massive raid-wide damage, and the way to stop it is by having 5 players click on the cubes, and when they do, Magtheridon gets a debuff which makes him take, I think, 200% additional damage. And what the top guilds do is they just rotate 15 players to keep the debuff up at all times and cut the kill time by like 70%. But we are nothing more than a pug guild. We set up some IDs and people can join if they want. So making that many randoms coordinate something like that, you can imagine is pretty damn hard. But very luckily, Magtheridon also dropped the other tier token that we needed. But on to the exciting part now, the loot. So first up, the shoulders. I managed to roll a 50. Not bad, but I unfortunately lost the roll to Sethic. But very unexpectedly, he decided to trade me the shoulders. This was a very kind thing for him to do. He really didn't have to do that. So, thank you very much, Sethic. I will put it to good use. But then the chest piece gets called to roll, and I roll a 34, losing to Sethic. But he then decided to trade me the chest as well. I guess my man just doesn't need any loot. But seriously, it was very kind of him. And I never expect loot or anything from anyone, but you know, how can I resist? So what do you think? Suits me, right? So with another raid cleared, it is time for us to get this attunement finished once and for all. And our last stop is Heroic Shadow Labyrinth. To be honest, I am really sick of this dungeon at this point. After grinding to Exalted with the lower city in this place, I've never seen it the same. Luckily, this one really isn't that bad for a heroic dungeon. It felt very much the same as Shattered Halls, as in they don't really do much apart from having more health and doing a bit more damage. So we cleared up 2 and killed the first boss with 0 issues, but at the trash after the first boss, that's when things really started to crumble apart. The trash here is easily the hardest part of the dungeon. The Shadow Priests need to be CC'd, plus the heals need to be interrupted. Otherwise, it's just an absolute mess. And we just couldn't seem to crack this. We wiped close to 8 times on just this trash alone, and I'm still not sure as to why, because it really didn't feel any different than the normal version. And to make things just that little bit worse, the mage was clearly having some connection issues, and the warlock then decided just to dip mid-run. But we did luckily manage to replace him with this absolutely insane geared rogue, and he must have been our savior, because once he was here, things started to go a hell of a lot smoother, and we finally made it to the first boss after being in the dungeon for over an hour already. Now this boss is easily one of the most annoying bosses in the entire game. He's constantly charging around, he's threat resetting, he has a knockback, plus he has this really annoying ability where he mind controls everyone and makes us attack each other. The rogue blinded me, which caused the boss to charge me and instantly killed me. But of course, the boys were able to finish him off, and he dropped the Cloak of the Inciter, which, if I'm not mistaken, is actually pre-base for quite a few melee classes. The rest of the run went fine. I think that's the most positive way I can say it, but we did end up losing the mage again and stood AFK for like 15 minutes and then wiped on the trash because we pulled the boss at the same time. I'm genuinely not even sure why this run took us as long as it did, because it did not feel like it was overpowered or anything. But 2 hours later, we had finally managed to get Murmur down. Don't even think the Architraz took us that long. But with that now done, we had completed all 3 of the trials of the Naru and were now fully attuned for TBC Keep. So with our attunement now completed, let's clear up my raw footage folder. So back to Karazhan we go. Nothing massive in this one, but I think we did manage to upgrade a couple of the parses, especially on Netherspite, because it was finally back to being my turn on the blue beam. It's honestly so nerve-wracking, knowing that I had to be the one to pump. My damage here is supposed to be like 3 times the rest of the group, and yeah, it went alright. I definitely think that there was a lot to improve on rotation-wise, but again, I think it's just so nerve-wracking, and there's so much pressure knowing that I wouldn't be able to be on the blue beam again for at least a month. But I did manage to get it all the way up to 4.5k DPS, which at the time I believe was 3rd. So not the best, but no complaints. So moving on now to some more Gruul / Magtheridon. Unfortunately, Mulgar Parse Curse is still in full force, because basically right as we pulled, Tyan popped Recklessness and got one shot, quickly followed by me. And unfortunately, Gruul did not go as planned either, because of his mechanic that makes him slap whoever is second on threat, which sadly was me. As for the loot, DST is obviously still HR'd, and we already have the tier pieces we needed, which means the only other thing that we need now is Magtheridon's head. It's got no hit, but as it stands now, we are actually overcapped on hit. So there's no reason to really be chasing Garona's Signet Ring, which would just give us even more hit. So we get Magtheridon down, and would you believe it, the head actually dropped. And I managed to get a massive 98 roll, but so did the other feral that was with us. So of course, we had to roll again, and with an 84 roll, we managed to claim the head. And just like usual, I wasted no time and rushed over to Honor Hold to hand the head in. And just like that, we had managed to get ourselves full Phase 1 bis. As for the parsing, well, as I am writing this, I am sitting at rank 4 in Karazhan. But after tonight, I can assure you, I will be at the very least rank 3, maybe 2. And while this video kinda wraps up Phase 1 for us, and I know this phase isn't everyone's favourite, but I've had so much fun. I think this first phase of TBC is better than all of the vanilla ones. And it's not just the raids or the dungeons or whatever, but the game feels way more balanced. Finally, the top of the damage meters aren't just warriors. Building raid groups aren't just about how many warriors can we cram into one raid. It feels like he who is good at his class can actually show off and excel. And of course, Phase 2 is right around the corner, and I cannot wait to share my journey with you. If you guys made it this far into the video, then go ahead and let me know in the comments, because it genuinely means the world to me. Yeah, so Phase 1 is officially over now, and it's honestly been so much fun. I've played the game basically every single day since it launched, and I've met so many new people, and I've made so many new friends, and at the end of the day, that's all you can really ask for. Right. As for content that's coming, the next video is actually going to be on our 3rd character, but don't worry, we will still finish the Hunter at some point. But I can't lie, Hunter has been just a bit meh, in my opinion. The leveling was great, but the endgame stuff is just a bit boring. But this new class, I have fallen in love with. But anyways, let's not get into that now. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all later.